Part 52. The Prince longs for me every night after mastering thought reading. Author, Gongzi Yun Si. Chapter 511. Lin Xian thought that after being found to have her eyes treated, Shen Shuwei would come during the day. Now it was already noon, and he only saw Sichuan but not Shen Shuwei. Miao Sichuan rubbed Lin Xian's hand. That Wang was so obedient. Lin Xian lowered his eyes and looked at Sichuan on his legs. Shen Shuwei always took Sichuan with her wherever she went. Why didn't she take it with her today? He pinched Sichuan's ears. Does your master not want you anymore? Miao Sichuan stared at him with wide eyes. If he could speak, he would definitely say that your wife doesn't want you anymore. One person and one cat, staring at each other. After Lin Xian pinched the ear, he flicked its nose again. Your master is blind, and you are blind too. Sichuan couldn't help rolling his eyes. You are blind and don't recognize your wife. Lin Xian looked at Sichuan's expression. Why did he feel that it was disdaining him? Not only disdaining, but also mocking. Shen Shuwei said that Sichuan was not an ordinary pet. It seemed that it was indeed not ordinary. The cat's nose was not as sensitive as a dog's. What's more, Sichuan is several times smarter and more sensitive than a dog. Are you really a cat? Could it be the legendary spirit beast? Lin Xian was just joking. There is such a legend. It is said that the Kangbei mountain is full of fairy air and the terrain is steep. No one dares to approach it. There are spirit beasts on the mountain. Spirit beasts can live up to 100 years. They only recognize one master and are loyal to the master. But no one has seen it for hundreds of years. Sichuan blinked his big round eyes twice. Meow. Lin Xian grabbed Sichuan, lifted it up and looked at him. Where is your master? Sichuan turned his head away from him. Lin Xian was amused by Sichuan's look of I won't tell you, so stupid. Sichuan stretched out his claws towards him dissatisfiedly. Meow. Lin Xian chuckled. You don't even know where your master is. What else is stupid? Lin Xian never thought of using provocation on a cat, and he didn't think it would work. Miao Sichuan struggled to jump off from under him angrily, turned around and ran away. Lin Xian was stunned for a moment, and then he saw it run out, stop and look back at himself. He hesitated for a while and then moved his wheelchair to catch up. He had been to the Xin Miao Imperial City for so long, and he had only been to the waterside pavilion, and had not been to other places. He did not know what the Xin Miao Imperial City looked like. Now that he could see it, he took this opportunity to go out for a walk. Sichuan was actually quite considerate. He would stop and wait for him after running for a while, and from time to time he showed a hint of impatience, as if to say, if you don't hurry up, I won't wait for you. Lin Xian found it funny that he could see these expressions from a cat. But he was in a wheelchair, so he couldn't speed up. He could only move the wheelchair with his hands, and he couldn't move it without some strength. The afternoon sun was very dazzling. He had just recovered his eyesight not long ago, and he was a little uncomfortable with such strong sunlight. It was not until he was under the grape trellis that the dense vines blocked a lot of the scorching sun, and he felt better. The grape trellis was like a winding path, with no end in sight. Lin Xian followed Sichuan forward. After about a cup of tea, he suddenly heard a burst of laughter. Wu Tan, Dr. Shen still loves snacks. Shen Shuwei, I not only love snacks, I eat anything delicious. As for the temple, I don't want to go there again. Wang Jingyuan asked curiously, what's wrong? Wu Tan chuckled, Dr. Shen doesn't like vegetarian food. Lin Xian pushed the wheelchair over and saw 3 people sitting in the pavilion from a distance. One of them was Shen Shuwei, another was Wang Jingyuan, and the other was a monk, whom he didn't know. The 3 of them chatted while eating snacks, talking and laughing, so happy. No wonder she didn't come to find him, it turned out that she was with them. Didn't she say that she was the crown princess? As the crown princess, she talked and laughed with other men without any suspicion? Shen Shuwei took a bite of the cake and looked at Wang Jingyuan and Wu Tan in front of her. She didn't expect that they knew Xiao Jinyan in Nanzhao Kingdom. You talk to me about Nanzhao Kingdom. Wang Jingyuan looked at Shen Shuwei with a smile on his face. What do you want to hear? Shen Shuwei looked at the two people in front of him and blinked her beautiful big eyes twice. I want to hear about Xiao Jinyan. Wang Jingyuan was suddenly curious. What is your relationship with Xiao Jinyan? Shen Shuwei took a bite of the cake in her hand and said embarrassedly, I'm his wife. Wang Jingyuan was drinking tea and suddenly heard this. The tea that he didn't have time to drain made him cough. Shen Shuwei paused in chewing and felt a little hurt. Is it so scary? No, that's not what I meant. Wang Jingyuan coughed for a long time and felt better. He asked again, are you Xiao Jinyan's wife? Shen Shuwei nodded, yes. Why are you so surprised? Wang Jingyuan raised his head and looked at Wu Tan. Do you know? Wu Tan nodded. Wang Jingyuan was stunned for a moment, then looked at Shen Shuwei. You. Wang Jingyuan kept saying you for a long time, but he didn't know what to say or what to ask. The girl in front of him who looked very much like Feng Guiyu was Xiao Jinyan's wife. Then Xiao Jinyan, Feng Guiyu. Wang Jingyuan suddenly felt confused. Lin Xian watched them chatting and laughing, frowning, and saw Sichuan on the side. He called out, Sichuan, go call her over. Sichuan turned his head and looked at him with contempt. Why didn't he go by himself? Lin Xian urged, go quickly. Sichuan looked back at Shen Shuwei and walked over on all fours. Seeing that the snow group was gone, Lin Xian thought about it and felt that he was not suitable here, so he moved his wheelchair back. Shen Shuwei waited expectantly for them to talk about Xiao Jinyan's stay in Nanzhao Kingdom. A meow call attracted her attention. She turned around and looked over, saw the snowball, and didn't think much about it. She guessed that it had woken up and looked for her without seeing her. Just as he was about to bend down to hug it, Xue Tuan turned around and ran away. Shen Shuwei's hand paused in mid-air, looking at Xue Tuan who had already run away. Just when she was about to give up, Xue Tuan stopped and looked back at her. When Shen Shuwei saw the expectant look in its eyes, she knew that Sichuan wanted her to follow him. Who made it a snowball? She sat up straight and looked at them apologetically. You guys chat first, I'll go find Xue Tuan. Wang Jingyuan said, okay. Wu Tan, okay. Shen Shuwei stood up and chased after him. Wang Jingyuan watched Shen Shuwei chase Xue Tuan. When they were far away, he looked at Wu Tan. Do you think she is similar to Feng Guiyu? Wu Tan looked away and nodded, yes, they are very similar. When I first saw her, I thought she looked very similar to Feng Guiyu. There is also Xue Tuan. Feng Guiyu's pet is also named Sichuan. Wang Jingyuan looked at Shen Shuwei who had walked away, and then looked away. Wu Tan made a bold guess. Feng Guiyu has disappeared for so long, do you think it is possible that she is Feng Guiyu? Wang Jingyuan went to Nanzhao Kingdom 4 years ago, but when he went there, he found that Feng Guiyu was not there. He searched all over Nanzhao Kingdom but could not find her. Wu Tan said, the poor monk has also suspected it, but there is no evidence to prove that she is Feng Guiyu. Wang Jingyuan sighed helplessly, I hope she is Feng Guiyu, at least I can see her before I die, otherwise I will have no chance. A flash of surprise flashed in Wu Tan's eyes. What do you mean by this? Wang Jingyuan laughed softly, I had my fortune told when I was a child. I don't know if I will live long. It's a miracle that I can survive until now. Wu Tan was startled at first, and then seemed to have discovered something. Is this why you went to Nanzhao Kingdom? Wang Jingyuan nodded, well, otherwise I would have died. Wu Tan was a little surprised, I never heard you mention it, I thought. Wang Jingyuan suddenly asked, why did you suddenly become a monk? Wu Tan said calmly, when fate comes, it will happen naturally. Dr. Shen doesn't like fasting, but a humble monk thinks fasting is good. Wang Jingyuan said, Dr. Shen and Feng Wu are very similar. They both like to eat. The vegetarian food is too vegetarian, so she naturally doesn't like it. Wu Tan asked, how come Dr. Shen appears here? Wang Jingyuan gave an overview of what happened, and then said, my sister saved a man who looked very similar to Xiao Jinyan. Wu Tan asked, you mean, Xiao Jinyan is here? Wang Jingyuan also learned after asking for the past 2 days that the man who looked exactly like Xiao Jinyan was a man his sister accidentally rescued, named Lin Xian. If he is Xiao Jinyan, then Shen Chuwei is his wife? No wonder Shen Chuwei was so worried and nervous about him and believed that he was Xiao Jinyan. It's not yet confirmed whether he is Xiao Jinyan. He said his name is Lin Xian, but Dr. Shen is sure that he is Xiao Jinyan. Wu Tan said, really? There are many people who look similar, like Dr. Shen and Feng Wu, aren't they similar? Asterisk. Shen Chuwei followed Xue Tuan for a long time. It was really not suitable to go out in summer, and she felt like she was getting heated up. I wonder where Xue Tuan will take her? After walking for a while, I saw a snowball running into the water pavilion. Shen Chuwei went into the waterside pavilion once and it was very cool inside. Shen Chuwei followed him in. As soon as he entered, he saw a man sitting at the table. The man had picturesque features and a noble temperament. Who else could he be besides Xiao Jinyan? Shen Chu glanced at Xue Tuan, who looked away and said that he was just an errand boy. As expected, she was Xiao Jinyan's pet and knew how to lead her to her master. Shen Chuwei walked over openly, sat down on the stone stool in front of him, and poured himself a cup of tea. Lin Xianxian glanced at Shen Chuwei, pretending to be surprised and asked, why are you here? Shen Chu took a few sips of tea and said, I came with Sichuan. Really? Lin Xianxian glanced at Xue Tuan and found that Xue Tuan was looking at him, with strong contempt in his eyes. The prince longs for me every night after mastering thought reading. Author, Gongzi Yun Si. Chapter 512. Chapter 512. After Lin Xian knew the truth, his reaction after showing him the painting. First update. Lin Xian actually saw contempt in a cat's eyes. Perhaps he felt guilty. He glanced at it and looked away, pretending not to know anything. Shen Chuwei put down the teacup and said seriously, of course, otherwise how would I know that you are in the waterside pavilion and not in the guest room? Lin Xian picked up the teacup and took a few sips, and said in a light voice, what did you do today? Sleeping in the house, what can you do on such a hot day? Shen Chuwei picked up the kettle and poured herself another cup of tea to replenish herself with water. Lin Xian stopped drinking tea. He was clearly talking and laughing with the two men, but he actually told him that he was sleeping? Shen Chu drank 2 cups of tea in a row to quench his thirst, then put down the teacup, held his chin with both hands, and stared at Xiao Jinyan without blinking. I clearly remembered her last night, but why didn't I remember her as soon as I fell asleep? Lin Xian asked curiously, what are you looking at? Shen Chuwei blurted out subconsciously, you were so shy last night and your ears were so red. Lin Xian snorted coldly, nonsense, how could I be shy? Shen Chuwei was a little embarrassed, stood up with his hands on the table, and came closer. Lin Xian looked at Shen Chuwei who suddenly came closer, and immediately stiffened at the fragrance that hit his face. The breath that came out was right next to the ear, with a scorching temperature, because we are kissing. Lin Xian took a sip of tea to cover up his panic. When he heard this, the tea that he had no time to swallow went directly into his nose, making him cough uncomfortably. Seeing this, Shen Chuwei hurriedly came over, patted his back, took out a handkerchief and handed it to him, husband. Lin Xian had never been so embarrassed. He wiped the tea with a handkerchief, raised his head and looked at Shen Chuwei, and asked again uncertainly, what did you just say? Shen Chu blinked his beautiful big eyes twice, and repeated patiently, "We kissed last night, what happened? I took the initiative? Why don't I remember?" Lin Xian wiped the tea on his nose again in disbelief. How could he take the initiative to kiss her? How ridiculous! Seeing his disgusted look, Shen Chuwei expressed some dissatisfaction. "What's wrong with taking the initiative? In the past, you took the initiative almost every time. Is there anything wrong with it?" Lin Xian retorted, "I can't possibly do that to you." Shen Chu touched his face slightly and was a little confused. "Have I reached the point where I am old and yellow and annoying to others?" Lin Xian. Shen Chuwei was a little reluctant. She squatted in front of Xiao Jinyan, holding onto the armrests of her wheelchair. Her sweet voice sounded a little aggrieved, "But I'm only 19 years old, and you already dislike me." Lin Xian lowered his eyes and looked at the woman in front of him. Who knew she was 19 years old? It would not be an exaggeration to describe her as a natural beauty with a skin as smooth as cream. And this face is still a bit childish, with a pair of clear eyes that can speak. Does this have anything to do with me? You should ask your husband, not me. Shen Chuwei looked at him persistently. Then do you dislike it? Lin Xian pursed his lips. Why should I dislike her? You are not my wife. Shen Chuwei sighed helplessly. Half a month had passed and he still didn't remember her. She would rather remember her like last night, although she was a little more innocent. I'll show you a picture. Lin Xian asked, "What painting?" Go back and see. Shen Chu smiled mysteriously, then stood up and pushed the wheelchair out. Lin Xian didn't stop her. Seeing how mysterious she was, he was curious about what painting Shen Chuwei wanted to show him. Snow Tuan followed the two of them dissatisfiedly. It ran back and forth several times today without even hugging it. Back in the guest room, Shen Chuwei took out the bamboo tube, opened it, took out the painting inside, and handed it to him shyly. For you. Lin Xian took the painting, raised his eyes and glanced at Shen Chuwei, and opened the painting in his hand with curiosity. As the painting slowly opened, the first thing he saw was a man with long hair like ink, delicate eyebrows and a bridge of nose. Tall and tall, you can vaguely see fine beads of sweat on your forehead and the bridge of your nose. The painting is very detailed, so detailed that you can even see the pores, hair, and facial features. When he saw the man's complete face, he was shocked. Not only was he shocked by his painting skills, but also by the man's appearance, which was exactly the same as his face. What's even more shocking is that there is another person opposite the man. Just by looking at her delicate eyebrows, you can guess that it is a woman. The woman's eyes were somewhat blurred and charming, with tears hanging from the ends of her eyes. Her misty eyes contained a hint of youth. Her long hair reached her waist, and her smooth and delicate back was looming. He recognized the woman in the painting as Shen Chuwei at a glance. He also discovered that the man was not wearing any clothes. The woman wears red obscene clothes and is closely attached to the man in the painting. He has never seen any master who can draw people so lifelike. Lin Xian's throat tightened. He did not expect that Shen Chuwei would show him such a painting. He knew that the people in the painting were Shen Chuwei and her husband Xiao Jinyan without asking. Shen Chu came over slightly. Don't you think the man in the painting is you? Lin Xian hurriedly closed the painting, raised his head guiltily, and saw the unpainted face close at hand, beautiful and delicate, just like in the painting. Influenced by the painting, a picture suddenly appeared in his mind, which was Shen Chuwei showing the exact same expression as in the painting. After just thinking about it for a moment, he surprisingly discovered that he actually had. Shen Chuwei suggested with a serious face, I heard that close contact can awaken some memories. Do you want to try it? Lin Xian subconsciously thought that she was talking about the intimate contact in the painting, and his mouth suddenly felt dry, and then he became very angry. How can you try this? In fact, What Shen Shuwei refers to as intimate contact is multiple contact, such as hugging, kissing, or sharing the same bed. The human body has memory. If she wants to have more contact with it, maybe Xiao Jinyan will remember it. Shen Shuwei pointed at Xiao Jinyan in the painting and asked, then look at the man in the painting. How is it different from you? Lin Xian felt that she should not look at this kind of painting again, but she was also a little curious. How similar was the man in the painting to herself, which made Shen Shuwei think that he was her husband for a time. He hesitated for a while, then opened the painting in his hand again. He looked at the man in the painting. From his hair to his facial features and body, he was very similar to him. There is a scar on the man's heart, a very deep scar. He subconsciously touched his heart. If someone hadn't gouged out a piece there with a sharp instrument, would there be an identical scar? At this moment, footsteps suddenly came from outside the door. Lin Xian reacted immediately, closed the painting and stuffed it into the quilt. Shen Chu turned slightly to look outside the door and saw Wang Leiwen walking in, wearing red clothes. When Wang Leiwen saw Dr. Shen, he frowned and ignored him. He went straight to Lin Xian, and his sharp eyes were immediately replaced by gentleness. Mr. Lin, you will definitely get bored if you stay in the house all day long. Now that you can see, I will take you out for a walk and enjoy the imperial city. Lin Xian needed to go out for some air, so he nodded, okay. Shen Shuwei curled his lips dissatisfied, are you really going out? When Wang Leiwen heard this, he raised his head and looked at Dr. Shen, a flash of displeasure flashed in his eyes, does Mr. Lin want to go out? What does it have to do with you? Shen Chu pursed his lips slightly and glanced at Xiao Jinyan, only to see him lowering his eyes and saying nothing, a little angry, but unable to express it. Why doesn't it matter? I am a doctor. His eyes have just recovered. The sun outside is so strong. If I hurt my eyes again, wouldn't others say that my medical skills are not good? Wang Leiwen was speechless, but he was unwilling to lose face and forcefully defended, I just think Mr. Lin is too bored staying in the house. If I knew it would hurt my eyes, of course I would not take the risk of letting Mr. Lin go out and hurt his eyes. Lin Xian came to the table on his own, picked up the teapot and poured himself a cup of tea. He held it up to his lips and drank several sips. The tea had already cooled down, and drinking it into his stomach relieved some of the heat. Wang Leiwen couldn't talk to Dr. Shen, so he ignored her and came to the table to sit down, planning to chat with him for a while. Shen Shuwei also walked over, sat down next to Xiao Jinyan, picked up the teapot, poured herself a cup of tea, and drank it slowly. Wang Liyuanxun saw Dr. Shen standing aside. He was not only an eyesore but also a hindrance. Dr. Shen, don't you have anything to do? Shen Shuwei drank tea and shook his head, no. Wang Leiwen clenched her fists. Since Lin Xian was around, she couldn't drive them away directly. She rolled her eyes and said with a smile, Dr. Shen has revealed the imperial list to treat diseases. You shouldn't go and see me, third brother? If you suddenly faint again, you won't be so lucky. Shen Shuwei paused to drink tea after hearing this. He hadn't checked Wang Jingyuan's pulse today, so he was busy chatting when they met in the afternoon. She glanced at Wang Leiwen and knew at a glance that he was plotting against Xiao Jinyan. I'll go check on Third Master later, don't worry Princess Leiwen. Lin Xian glanced at Shen Shuwei. If he went later, wouldn't it mean that he would have to wait until dark and live alone in the same room with a man and a woman? Would this reputation be lost? Seeing that he couldn't drive away Dr. Shen, Wang Leiwen stopped talking to him and looked at Lin Xian with a smile, I have found 2 more cooks and they are making dinner. You can try it later. Lin Xian, okay. Shen Shuwei became interested when he heard this. Wouldn't the new chef have different delicacies? This can wait. When dinner was approaching, Wang Leiwen saw Dr. Shen sitting there, looking a little unhappy. When the maid brought the dinner to the table one by one, She found that not only did Dr. Shen have no intention of leaving, but he stood up and washed his hands. After the food was served, although Wang Leiwen was dissatisfied with Dr. Shen's lack of discernment, he still looked at Lin Xian happily. "Master Lin, try it and see if it tastes good to you. Then let them cook for you." Yes, Lin Xian picked up the chopsticks and put some vegetables into the bowl. He behaved elegantly and dignifiedly while eating. Shen Shuwei looked at the delicious food on the table and felt a little greedy. She couldn't help but pick up the spare chopsticks, pick up the food and put it into her mouth to taste. When Wang Leiwen saw it, his expression changed immediately. "Dr. Shen, at this time, the meal I prepared for Mr. Lin, your maid has already delivered it to your room." Shen Shuwei had long been tired of the food here, and as soon as she saw the food in front of her, she knew that it was not the food of the Xin Miao ethnic group, so of course she couldn't miss it. "Master Lin is a patient, and I am a doctor. I have to be responsible for the patient. There are certain dishes that he cannot eat, as they will aggravate his condition," Shen Shuwei said confidently. Wang Leiwen was angry and annoyed when he heard this, but couldn't say anything. Lin Xian raised his eyes and glanced at Shen Shuwei, then handed the rice in front of her. "You can eat it." Shen Shuwei was just short of a bowl of rice. Suddenly there was an extra bowl of rice in front of her. She arched her eyebrows happily. "Then I'm welcome." Lin Xian looked at Shen Shuwei, who looked happy, and said calmly, "Well, give me acupuncture after eating." Shen Shuwei agreed without saying a word. Wang Leiwen was very unhappy, but he had no reason to ask Dr. Shen to leave. After the meal, Shen Shuwei was full and satisfied. Lin Xian was only half full because he felt that the food was not as delicious as Shen Shuwei's. Wang Leiwen couldn't wait to ask, "Mr. Lin, what do you think?" Lin Xian nodded. "The cooking skills are good, let them stay." "Okay, I'll let them stay." Wang Leiwen left happily. Shen Shuwei touched her stomach and stood up contentedly. "I'm going to take Wang Jingyuan's pulse." Lin Xian frowned. "Didn't you say you would give me acupuncture?" Good night, babies. Please support with monthly tickets and recommendation tickets. This is the first update on the 7th. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The prince longs for me every night after mastering thought reading. Author, Gongzi Yun Si. Chapter 513. Shen Shuwei just stood up. After hearing this, she sat back down. After eating and drinking, her favorite thing to do was to lie down, but now was not the time to lie down. "I'll give you acupuncture after I check your pulse. I'll be back soon." Lin Xian said, dissatisfied. "Then why didn't you go just now? When you gave me acupuncture, you had to go to him to diagnose my pulse." Shen Chu said slightly. "Didn't you have dinner just now?" Lin Xian asked again. "What about before dinner? Why don't you go?" Shen Shuwei answered confidently. "Weren't Wang Leiwen here before? It's not appropriate for a man and a woman to live together in the same room." Lin Xian heard this and explained, "Princess Leun and I are innocent, don't overthink it." Shen Shuwei didn't think so. You should not have the intention to harm others, and you should have the intention to guard against others. Based on her intuition, Wang Leiwen had some serious thoughts about Xiao Jinyan. If your husband remembers me, I will naturally believe that he has a sense of propriety, but you don't remember it now. My husband is in his prime of life. What if he loses his sense of propriety? The phrase "full of blood" reminded Lin Xian of his reaction after seeing that painting. He was indeed full of blood at his age, but that didn't mean it was like what she said. The more you say it, the more outrageous it becomes. Stop talking, I have to check Wang Jingyuan's pulse, otherwise it will be too late. Is it appropriate for you to check Wang Jingyuan's pulse now? Shen Shuwei picked up the medicine box and retorted, "I'm going to see a doctor, what's wrong with that?" A man and a woman live alone in the same room, and Wang Jingyuan is also at a young age. Lin Xian snorted, is it appropriate? Shen Chuwei nodded thoughtfully, what you said makes sense. Lin Xian hummed with satisfaction, then are you still going? Shen Chu said softly, go ahead, I won't feel at ease if you don't check your pulse. Lin Xian's eyes paused, and his expression changed, then didn't you just say it made sense? Shen Chu smiled slightly, if Qin Xiao and I go together, it won't count as a man and a woman in the same room. I promise to go and come back as soon as possible. Lin Xian. Shen Chuwei held the medicine box, opened the door and walked out without looking back. Lin Xian angrily threw away the teacup in his hand. Finally, he realized that he was angry, but he was no longer calm. When Shen Chuwei came, Wang Jingyuan had just finished bathing and was wearing light-colored pajamas. If he came later, he might have to rest. Wang Jingyuan saw her coming and said with a slight smile, I thought you wouldn't come to check your pulse today. Shen Chuwei was a little embarrassed that it was delayed so late because of his own personal matters. Something delayed me for a while and kept you waiting. Wang Jingyuan said warmly, I'm very free now, you can come over at any time, no need to blame yourself. Shen Chuwei sat down in front of him, I'll check your pulse first, and then decide how to take medicine tomorrow. Qin Xiao put the medicine box on the table, then opened it, took out the medical pad and put it on the table. After following Shen Chuwei for a while, he became more and more comfortable as an assistant. When Shen Chuwei brought the examination pad over, Wang Jingyuan also extended his hand over in cooperation. In summer clothes, the wrists were exposed, so there was no need to roll them up. Shen Chuwei diagnosed his pulse carefully. Shen Chuwei was relatively familiar with Wang Jingyuan's illness. After a period of treatment, his condition stabilized. It's just that he is very particular about medication. The medicine he uses needs to be mild and non-irritating. Wang Jingyuan's body will not be able to bear any stronger medicine. After Shen Chu took a microdiagnosis of his pulse, he knew what medicine to take tomorrow. You have a good rest, I'll come back tomorrow. Wang Jing saw that she was about to leave and stopped her, Dr. Shen, how did you become Xiao Jinyan's wife? When Qin Xiao heard his master's name, he raised his head and glanced at Wang Jingyuan, his eyes searching. Shen Chuwei said it was natural, if you enter the East Palace through the draft, you will naturally be Xiao Jinyan's wife. Is there any problem? Wang Jingyuan didn't understand the rules of Daxia, but he understood that it was imperial power and no one dared to disobey it. No problem, I'm just curious. What kind of person do you think Xiao Jinyan is? Shen Chuwei said without even thinking, he is very smart, an excellent future prince, and a qualified husband. A short sentence that does not contain many adjectives but contains many. Wang Jingyuan was a little surprised when he heard this, Xiao Jinyan is the prince. Shen Chu nodded slightly, yeah. After Wang Jingyuan was surprised, he nodded in agreement, no wonder you said that he is excellent. If he can become the prince, he is naturally the best among the princes. Shen Chuwei was quite proud, I still have good taste. Wang Jingyuan asked curiously, are you sure that Lin Xian is Xiao Jinyan? Then why didn't you just say it? Then take him away. Shen Chuwei said helplessly, I also want to take him away, but he doesn't think he is Xiao Jinyan, and this is the Xin Miao tribe, not Daxia. I still don't know who wants to kill Xiao Jinyan. It's better to be careful, Wan, if something happens, I'm afraid I won't be able to protect him. Among the entire Xin Miao tribe, he was the only one who knew Shen Chuwei's identity, Lin Xian's undetermined identity, and the purpose of coming here. Then tell me this, aren't you afraid that I will tell others? Shen Chuwei said with a mysterious face, because I can read faces, and you have a kind face. You are not the kind of person who stabs you in the back. When Wang Jingyuan heard this, he was startled at first, and then he couldn't help laughing. The way you talk is very much like Feng Wu. She also said similar things. Shen Chu looked slightly surprised. What a coincidence. Once she secretly ate the tribute. How could the tribute be eaten? But she ate secretly and hid behind the door. I saw her. She was not afraid and ate the cake in front of me. I asked her if she was not afraid that I would tell others. She said, I can read faces, and you are not the kind of person who likes to tell stories. Wang Jingyuan couldn't help but smile again after saying that, and then the smile gradually disappeared because he hadn't seen her for many years. Shen Shuwei couldn't help but laugh after hearing this. I think what she said makes sense. You are a nice person. You won't snitch, and you certainly won't stab someone in the back. It's a pleasure to be trusted, then and now. Wang Jingyuan said, since you believe in me, I will definitely not let you down, but don't worry, I can keep you safe here. Shen Shuwei's eyebrows curled up happily when he heard this. With your words, I feel more confident. I feel like I'm holding you on my lap, giving me a sense of security. Wang Jingyuan was amused. Is it so exaggerated? Shen Shuwei nodded vigorously. I heard that you are a heaven-level Gu master, and you are also a rare Gu master genius. Wang Jingyuan's actual age is 24 years old. He has been in poor health since childhood, but he is a rare genius for making poison. During this period, he went to Nanzhao Kingdom for medical treatment. These were all found out by Qin Xiao, and Shen Shuwei was shocked for a long time, knowing that he knew the big names in the Gu master world. The Xin Miao people, who are unfamiliar with the place where they live, are nothing but a big hug. Wang Jingyuan chuckled, he is a heaven-level Gu master. As for genius, they are just exaggerating. Shen Shuwei said seriously, none of these are important. The important thing is that a heaven-level Gu master makes people feel safe. When she came here, what she was most afraid of was accidentally being poisoned. Thinking of those unheard of and unseen poisons made her skin crawl. People you know how to remove the poison, like her, a doctor, so there is no need to worry. Wang Jingyuan smiled when he heard this. It turns out that the sense of security comes from the title of Heavenly Gu Master, not from him. After Shen Shuwei left, Wang Jingyuan lay on the bed. He had recovered well in the past 2 days, which was all due to Shen Shuwei. However, he couldn't sleep at the moment. As soon as he closed his eyes, a pair of smiling eyes were looking at him. After Shen Shuwei came out, he probably hugged her on his lap accidentally, and his steps were more cheerful and relaxed than usual when he walked. Qin Xiao followed slowly with the medicine box in hand. Although he had doubts in his heart, he didn't ask them. When she returned to the guest room, Shen Shuwei saw a light on at the door of another guest room and saw a slender figure in the yard. Under the light, the man's handsome features were looming, like jade hidden in the world. Little Master Wu-Tan Shen Chu greeted with a slight smile. When Wu-Tan heard a familiar voice, he turned his head and saw Shen Chu walking over with a smile. An imperceptible smile appeared in his cold eyes. Dr. Shen, haven't you rested yet? Shen Chu said softly, I just came from Third Master's place. Now I have to go to Lin Xian to see a doctor. After that, I can rest. Before Xiao Jinyan's identity is confirmed, he will be called Lin Xian. Wu Tan asked, he also lives here. Shen Chu nodded slightly, well, we are all guests. We all live in the guest rooms and can visit each other. Wu Tan said, the poor monk just needs to stay for a few more days. Then I'll go in first. Shen Chu waved slightly and walked into the courtyard with cheerful steps, followed by Qin Xiao. Wu Tan stood under the porch, watching Shen Shuwei walk into the yard, open the door and walk in, and then he looked back leisurely. The moment the door opened, Lin Xian raised his head and looked at the door. When he saw Shen Shuwei, he asked, didn't you tell me to go back quickly? Why did it take so long? We chatted for a while. Shen Shuwei came over happily and sat down in front of Xiao Jinyan. Lin Xian saw a smile on her face, as if she had encountered something particularly happy. What are you talking about so happily? Even Lin Xian himself didn't realize how sour his tone was. Shen Shuwei said proudly, I hugged a thigh. Lin Xian's eyes darkened when he heard this. Can't you, a woman, be more reserved? Hug someone else's lap. Qin Xiao just opened the medicine box, and when he heard the sentence, he knew that his master had misunderstood Shen Shuwei's words. Shen Shuwei explained, we are in a place where we are not familiar with each other. It is a good thing that we can hold each other on our lap. There is no need to be reserved. Lin Xian. Is it a good thing to hug someone's lap? Qin Xiao couldn't help but explain, Master, holding someone's thigh means having a strong backer. Lin Xian was a little embarrassed when he heard this, because he thought hugging his thighs meant literally. Only then did Shen Shuwei realize that Xiao Jinyan had misunderstood her words, and she couldn't help but laugh out loud. Why has my husband become so stupid? How could I really hug someone's thigh? Lin Xian glanced at Qin Xiao coldly. Qin Xiao felt that he had talked too much. After thinking about it, he exited and closed the door. Lin Xian looked back at Shen Shuwei and asked casually, whose thigh are you hugging? Wang Jingyuan, he is a heaven-level Gu master, very powerful. Shen Chu gave him acupuncture with a little familiarity. This time was different from the previous times. This time he would use medicinal moxibustion later. Lin Xian snorted and said nothing. After the medicinal moxibustion was finished, Shen Shuwei packed up the medicine box and put down his trousers. After the medicinal moxibustion, Lin Xian felt as if his knees were surrounded by warmth, which was very comfortable. Shen Shuwei stood up and looked at Xiao Jinyan wearing a white undershirt. The summer undershirt was very thin, and the collar was slightly open, revealing the gauze inside. She slowly leaned over. Lin Xian was about to go to bed to rest when he saw a figure looming over him. As the figure approached, the faint scent of peach blossoms came to his face, making his body stiffen. He looked up at Shen Shuwei. Because of his approach, his body instinctively leaned back. When he was about to fall, he could only use his hands to support the bed to prevent himself from falling on the bed. What are you doing? Shen Shuwei put her arms around his neck and said seriously, I want to try to get closer to you to see if I can make you remember me. Good afternoon, babies. Please support with monthly tickets and recommendation tickets. Second update. The prince longs for me every night after mastering thought reading. Author, Gongzi Yun Si. Chapter 514. When Lin Xian heard this, he thought of what Shen Shuwei had said that afternoon and wanted to do something intimate with him. As for intimate matters, he thought of that painting and his mouth became dry. Anyone who sees that painting will be stimulated. He is just a normal man, and the man in the painting is exactly like him, so his reaction is normal. No. Shen Shuwei was a little disappointed. Why not? Lin Xian said one sentence at a time, in such an intimate matter, you are the one who suffers. There will be no room for regret in the future. Why do you ruin yourself because of a similar face? Shen Shuwei laughed again when she heard the words, and took the initiative to press forward. She also didn't forget that Xiao Jinyan had a wound on his heart, so she avoided pressing his wound. Are you afraid that I would suffer a loss, so that's why you refused? When the person on his body came closer, Lin Xian's breath was stagnant and his face turned slightly red. He turned his head away from looking at Shen Shuwei. Don't you understand what I mean? Come down quickly. Shen Shuwei asked again without giving up, are you really not willing to give it a try? Lin Xian was a little impatient, why do you bother? Shen Shuwei couldn't help but emphasize her tone, of course it's necessary, I just hope you can remember me quickly. I want to go home. Lin Xian said in a hoarse voice, get off of me first. Shen Shuwei didn't notice the change in the man. She looked at the two of them doubtfully. Although they were close to each other, she didn't forget that he was a patient, so she didn't put her weight on him, but pressed against him. She looked at the man with an innocent face. I didn't press on your wound. She just wanted a kiss. Why was it so difficult? In the past, when they kissed her, he would not let her go until she was out of breath. Lin Xian was about to collapse at this moment. He only felt extremely hot, very hot, and his back felt like it was getting soaked. I said he was full of energy in the afternoon, but have you forgotten now? Shen Shuwei noticed that the man's face was getting redder and redder, and she reached out to touch his face. She was even more confused. During the mock Sebastian just now, she checked his pulse and everything was normal. Your face is so red and hot. Lin Xian pretended to be calm and said, it's too hot in the room. Is it hot? Shen Chu raised his head slightly and looked out the window. The wind was a bit strong tonight and the windows creaked. It was not hot but rather cool. Lin Xian said angrily, of course it's hot. Shen Chuwei looked away and found that not only was his face blushing, but his narrow phoenix eyes were also red. She suddenly thought of Xiao Jinyan that night, who was also suddenly shy. Are you shy? Lin Xian. Shen Chuwei was not impatient, but he was particularly anxious about Xiao Jinyan's recovery of memory. Probably because they were so in love before, and suddenly they were back to the starting point and became strangers, their attitudes were so different, which made her a little sad. If we go back to the beginning, even if Xiao Jinyan doesn't come to see her once a year, she won't feel anything wrong. She should eat and drink as she should, and her life could not be more comfortable. Thinking of this, she wanted Xiao Jinyan to remember it quickly and go home together, so she could continue eating and drinking. Just when Shen Chuwei was distracted, he was pushed down on the bed by a strong force. After Lin Xian pushed her away, he took a deep breath, but he still couldn't calm down his fast heartbeat and the evil thoughts in his mind. Shen Chuwei was unprepared and was pushed onto the bed. The bedboard in summer was a bit hard because there was no bedding on it. His pampered body could not withstand such a fall. Immediately, half of his face turned red, and his elbow hurt, and even without looking, it turned red. Shen Chuwei sat up, rubbed her elbows, and touched her sore face. She raised her head and looked at Xiao Jinyan in confusion. Why did you push me? Shen Chuwei, who was already a little disappointed and sad, now felt even more aggrieved. Lin Xian turned his head and looked over, and saw Shen Chu looking at him slightly aggrievedly, his eyes a little red, as if he was about to cry. He didn't mean to hurt her, he just wanted to push her away so that he wouldn't lose control. Seeing her like this, I suddenly felt distressed, but the words she said were very hurtful. You, a married woman, can't you be more reserved? Do you have to come here to seduce me? It's obviously the same face, but at this moment it's strange and annoying, and the words he says are even more annoying. Shen Chu blinked his big watery eyes twice, and couldn't hold back the tears for a while, and fell with a loud sound. The moment Lin Xian saw her tears falling, he regretted what he had just said. Shen Chu pursed his lips slightly and said nothing. His misty eyes stared at the man in front of him without blinking, but his tears kept falling down like broken beads. Seeing her crying so wronged, Lin Xian couldn't help but feel a little flustered. The headache came back again, and it felt like his head was going to explode, and the pain was excruciating. Tears blurred his vision, and he did not see clearly what was wrong with Lin Xian. Shen Chuwei felt a little aggrieved. She only wanted Xiao Jinyan to remember that she was here. If there was a way, she would not think of having some intimate contact to remind him of her. Growing up, I have cried only a handful of times, but today was the first time that I cried because of a man's words. Dog man. She wiped away her tears, got off the bed, and started packing the medicine box without saying a word. Lin Xian watched Shen Chuwei pack the medicine box and guessed that she was leaving. He stretched out his hand to her, trying to keep her, but he had a splitting headache and couldn't even speak. After Shen Shuwei packed up the medicine box, he put it on his shoulder, thought for a moment and said, "You rest first, I'll come back tomorrow." After saying that, he opened the door and walked out, then closed the door. Lin Xian watched her walk out, but now he had no time to care about these things. The headache made him unable to think. Shen Shuwei returned to the guest room, put the medicine box on the table, rubbed his elbow, felt a little painful, rolled up his sleeves and looked down, and found that the skin on his elbow was scratched. No wonder it hurt so much. Qin Xiao said outside the door, "Master, the hot water is ready." "I'm coming," Shen Shuwei responded weakly, and took her clothes to take a bath. The bathroom is next door, and Qin Xiao is guarding the door, so there is no need to worry about someone suddenly breaking in. Shen Shuwei took off her clothes and sat in the bathtub. The broken skin accidentally touched the water, and she grimaced in pain. Thinking of what Xiao Jinyan said just now, she was still a little sad. After taking a bath, Shen Shuwei put on her clothes and returned to the guest room without saying a word. Qin Xiao found that Shen Shuwei was a little abnormal tonight, but because of his identity, he couldn't ask too much. After Shen Shuwei went in, he closed the door. Shen Shuwei sat on the bed, kicked off her shoes, took out a piece of strawberry-flavored candy from the space, unwrapped it, and put it into her mouth to eat. Eating candy in her mouth, the sweetness filled her entire mouth, and her mood also improved. She took out disinfectant and band-aids from the space, treated the broken skin on her elbow, and then used 2 band-aids, so that it would not hurt so much if she accidentally touched it. After doing this, Shen Shuwei took out chocolate, potato chips, sesame candy, and cola from the space. Usually she was reluctant to eat them, for fear that she would finish them and have nothing to eat in the future. These are the items stored before she came here. There is a storage room in the space that can keep the food from expiring. In layman's terms, it is equivalent to balancing the space and time is still. Shen Shuwei tore open the potato chips, picked up a piece and put it in her mouth. It was crunchy when she chewed it, and then she picked up the cola, opened it, and put it to her mouth and took a sip. Carbonated drinks are not good for the body, but it is okay to satisfy your cravings occasionally. She unwrapped the chocolate and took a bite. Suddenly, she missed Chengzi so much that she could eat homemade ice cream. The Xin Miao tribe was not as prosperous as Daxia, and there was no ice. At this time, in another guest room, Lin Xian was curled up on the bed. His splitting headache did not disappear, but became more severe and unbearable, so painful that he could not breathe. He wished someone could knock him out directly, which would be better than enduring such pain. After a while, the pain gradually disappeared. Xiao Jinyan looked at the unfamiliar place and thought of Xiaju. He couldn't wait to get out of bed, but as soon as his feet touched the ground, he felt a sharp pain. He didn't care about it. He put on his shoes and walked out. Every step he took would feel a sharp pain, but it was still bearable. It usually takes a few steps to reach the door, but it took him more than twice as long. Opening the door, the oncoming night breeze was a bit cool. He walked out from inside, holding the doorframe. Looking at the dark night, he didn't know which room Xiaju lived in, and he was a little anxious for a while. Xiao Jinyan endured the pain and walked out of the yard. He looked around and found a room with lights on, so he walked towards that room. Qin Xiao stayed up all night until late at night before going back to take a bath and rest. When he was about to take a bath, he found that the master came out of the room, and he hurried up to support him. "Master, why did you come out?" Xiao Jinyan saw Qin Xiao and asked, "Where is Xiaoju?" Qin Xiao raised his hand and pointed to the guest room opposite with lights on. "It's in that room, I'll carry you there." "No, I'll go there myself." Xiao Jinyan pushed Qin Xiao away and walked towards that room. Qin Xiao remembered that the master's leg was injured and he couldn't walk for the time being. He took 2 steps forward and supported his master again. "Master, your leg is injured, you'd better pay attention." Xiao Jinyan didn't say anything after hearing this, and let Qin Xiao support him to walk towards that room. The 2 guest rooms were not far apart, and they arrived in a short while. Arriving at the door, Qin Xiao let go of his master's arm, raised his hand and pushed the door open. After the master went in, he closed the door and stood guard outside. When in the palace, Xiao Jinyan would not knock on the door when entering the house, so Qin Xiao did not knock on the door, and let the master in directly. Shen Shuwei had just eaten a lot of snacks and was rinsing her mouth. She planned to go to bed after rinsing her mouth, and wake up to a new day. Suddenly hearing the sound of the door opening, she frowned, spit out the mouthwash in her mouth, picked up the teacup and drank a few sips of tea before spitting it out. After wiping her mouth with a handkerchief, she walked out from behind the screen. "Who is it?" As soon as the voice fell, she saw Xiao Jinyan standing in the room, and she was stunned for a moment. "Why are you here?" When Xiao Jinyan saw Xiaoju, his heart, which had been lifted up, finally fell to the ground. He said in a gentle voice, "I seem to see you crying, so I came to find you." Shen Shuwei's eyes flashed with a trace of doubt. Didn't Xiao Jinyan see whether she cried or not? Besides, why am I crying? Isn't he the one who knows best? Although Xiao Jinyan's words were hurtful, he was also a person with amnesia. Shen Shuwei took a few steps forward to support him. "Your leg is still injured. Is there anything that can't be said tomorrow?" Xiao Jinyan said, "I'm afraid you'll disappear." Shen Shuwei's heart softened immediately. She helped Xiao Jinyan to sit down by the bed, and then she sat down too. "How could I not disappear? Didn't we say we'd see you tomorrow?" Xiao Jinyan held her hand and called softly, "Xiaoju." Shen Shuwei was stunned when she heard the familiar name. She looked up at Xiao Jinyan in disbelief. "Do you remember? I updated 3 chapters today, with an average of 3,400 words per chapter. If it exceeds 8,000, it will be a small explosion. I will try to update earlier tomorrow. Good night, babies. Please support me with monthly votes and recommendation votes. The prince longs for me every night after mastering thought reading." Author, Gongzi Yun Si. Chapter 515. When Shen Shuwei raised her head, Xiao Jinyan saw that her eyes were red, and it was obvious that she had cried. "I have known her for so long, and I rarely see her cry. Most of the time, she smiles, especially when she eats, her beautiful eyes bend into crescents." He stretched out his slender fingers and touched her eyes. "Why are you crying?" Shen Shuwei looked at Xiao Jinyan in front of her in confusion, feeling that something was wrong. It just happened a while ago, but she forgot it so quickly. "Don't you remember what happened just now?" A trace of doubt flashed across Xiao Jinyan's eyes. "What happened?" Shen Shuwei suddenly thought of that night. Xiao Jinyan also suddenly remembered her, but it was a little different from usual, and his words and deeds were a little different from usual. But he still remembered her. Just when Shen Shuwei was confused, he was suddenly hugged into a hot chest. The embrace of summer was really hot. "Did someone bully you? Who is so brave to bully you?" Xiao Jinyan remembered Xiaoju's identity. Even the emperor respected her. Who dared to bully her? It would be fine if she didn't mention it. As soon as she mentioned it, Shen Shuwei's grievance came up again. She pouted in dissatisfaction. "Who else but you?" Seeing that she didn't say anything, Xiao Jinyan was anxious and worried. He let go of her and asked seriously, "Shall we go back to Daxia?" When Shen Shuwei heard about going back to Daxia, she nodded impatiently, "Okay." Her biggest wish now is to go back to Daxia with Xiao Jinyan. Although the palace is as deep as the sea, it is also their home. She wants to go home. Xiao Jinyan was surprised by the promise too readily. After the surprise, he was happy because Xiaju was willing to go home with him. "We will go back tomorrow morning." Shen Shuwei responded happily, "Okay." A smile appeared in Xiao Jinyan's eyes, and he wanted to go back to Daxia immediately. Then she thought of his injury, and shook her head again. "No, your leg hasn't healed yet, and you're still injured. You can't travel easily, you need to rest." Xiao Jinyan looked down at his legs. When he was walking just now, he found that his legs hurt a lot and walked slowly. He didn't remember why he was injured. "Then wait until your legs are healed, and we'll go back to Daxia." Shen Shuwei nodded vigorously, threw herself into his arms, avoided the wound on her chest, and hugged his neck. Xiao Jinyan stretched out his arms to hug her, and could clearly feel the difference between her and her childhood. While he was happy to meet her again, he still had many doubts. Why didn't he remember many things? Xiaoju is 15 years old now, right? Why is his memory of the past few years blank? He raised his head and glanced at the room. The furnishings were the same as those in Nanzao Kingdom. Where is this place? Shen Shuwei raised his head and looked at Xiao Jinyan, thinking that just now in his room, he just wanted to kiss her, and pushed her, but he was scolded. Now there is still some hurt in my heart. Why can't I kiss my husband? Jinyan, kiss me. The soft and sweet voice was a bit coquettish, and at the same time it was an order. Shen Shuwei raised her chin, pouted slightly, and looked like she was waiting for a kiss, as if she had to make up for the kiss just now. Xiao Jinyan was stunned at first, and looked at Xiaju's posture, and felt inexplicably cute. In his eyes, men and women are different. Kissing the cheek is an overly intimate act, let alone kissing? You said that kissing is something that can only be done between boyfriends and girlfriends, don't regret it. Shen Shuwei opened her eyes when she heard it, and was about to say that they were already husband and wife, and kissing was just a normal act. But before she could say it, she saw a shadow covering her, and her lips softened, with a familiar breath. Shen Shuwei put her arms around his neck and took the initiative to respond to his kiss. After so many kisses, Shen Shuwei was the first time she had the upper hand. In the past, she was always entangled by Xiao Jinyan and had nowhere to hide. She was proud for a while, and then she fell behind. Shen Shuwei felt that she was almost out of breath, but fortunately Xiao Jinyan stepped back at this time. She gasped and felt good to breathe fresh air. Xiao Jinyan looked at the girl's misty eyes, opened her lips, and was shining with water. He couldn't help but lower his head and kissed her again. Shen Shuwei buried her face in his neck. "Sleepy, Jinyan?" Xiao Jinyan hugged her and replied in a gentle voice, "I'm here." "I'm so sleepy." Shen Shuwei's voice was low, with a bit of coquettishness. "Then you go to sleep first." Xiao Jinyan tried to separate them so that she could lie on the bed to rest. As soon as they separated, she was hugged tightly by Shen Shuwei again. "Don't leave, let's sleep together." Xiao Jinyan said in a gentle voice, "I won't leave, I'll accompany you by the side." Shen Shuwei couldn't resist the sleepiness and was laid flat on the bed by Xiao Jinyan. But Shen Shuwei, who had just closed her eyes, suddenly opened her eyes again and stared at Xiao Jinyan. Although Xiao Jinyan in front of her was also weird, he was better than the one who called himself Lin Xian. Last time, Xiao Jinyan didn't remember her after waking up. Will he forget her again after falling asleep this time? Thinking of this, she didn't dare to sleep again. Seeing her sitting up again, Xiao Jinyan asked, "What's wrong?" Shen Shuwei took his wrist and rested his chin on his shoulder. "I'm afraid you won't remember me after waking up." Xiao Jinyan smiled and comforted her gently. "No, rest at ease." Shen Shuwei said, "Last time, you didn't remember me after waking up, and asked if I drugged you." Xiao Jinyan's eyes flashed with doubt. "How could I say that to you? You don't remember me like this." Shen Shuwei yawned after saying that, and his double eyelids began to fight. Xiao Jinyan also found that there might be something wrong with his memory. The memories of the past few years seemed to have disappeared out of thin air. He couldn't remember what happened. When he looked down at Xiaoju, he found that she had fallen asleep on his arm. He carefully laid her flat on the bed and looked at the sleeping Xiaoju. Just like when she was a child, she would sleep very deeply as long as she fell asleep. Xiao Jinyan sat in front of the bed and waited until the early morning before leaving. Shen Shuwei slept until noon. When she opened her eyes and didn't see Xiao Jinyan, she hurried out of bed to look for him. She opened the door and ran to Xiao Jinyan's guest room without even washing her face. The door was open. Xiao Jinyan was sitting in a wheelchair drinking tea. She stood at the door, staring at the handsome and familiar face for a long time, but didn't speak for a long time, fearing that he would forget again. Lin Xian heard the footsteps and looked up at the door, and saw Shen Shuwei standing there in a middle-length shirt, with waist-length hair casually scattered, looking like she had just got up. Thinking that she cried so sadly last night because of him, she felt guilty but didn't want to admit it. So she just looked at her without saying anything. Shen Shuwei looked at the silent man, and her eyes were very different from last night, and her heart also cooled down. Xiao Jinyan had forgotten again. Shen Shuwei was a little helpless that her medical skills were great, but she couldn't make Xiao Jinyan recover his memory, and couldn't let him keep it after remembering her. She turned away disappointedly and left. Lin Xian saw Shen Shuwei suddenly running over and leaving without saying a word, and a puzzled look flashed in his eyes. Was he still angry? Shen Shuwei returned to the guest room, washed up and started to have breakfast. Looking at the food on the table, she suddenly lost her appetite. She wanted to eat dumplings, pan-fried buns, fried dough sticks, crystal buns. She missed Chengzi more and more. Shen Shuwei never made things difficult for herself. If she didn't want to eat, she didn't eat. She asked the maid to remove the breakfast, and then got up and went to the kitchen. There was still some time before lunch, and there were not many people in the huge kitchen. Shen Shuwei tied an apron and took out the flour and other things she had secretly taken out from the space. Cooking meals was simple for her. She rolled up her sleeves and started to knead the dough. A cook came over curiously and asked, "What is Dr. Shen doing?" Shen Shuwei looked up at the cook. He was a man in his 30s who had been a cook for many years. He was strong and looked very popular. He was the kind that would be easily ignored in the crowd. Fried dough sticks? The cook said with a puzzled look on his face, "I have been a cook for 5 years and have never heard of fried dough sticks." Shen Shuwei said, "Then you will know if you try it later. It tastes good." The cook agreed readily, "Okay, do you want me to help you?" Shen Shuwei did not want to be pretentious. She looked up at the ingredients in front of her and picked a piece of pork belly and handed it to the cook. "Help me cut the meat and mash it." Okay, the cook picked up the pork belly, washed it, and then diced it neatly. During this period, Shen Shuwei also taught him to add seasonings and mix them as stuffing. During Shen Shuwei's production process, the cook was watching and helping out. When the fried dough sticks were fried, the cook wanted to try them. "Can I try them first?" Shen Shuwei smiled slightly, "Yes." "Then I'll be welcome." The cook happily picked up the chopsticks and picked up a fried dough stick and put it into his mouth to take a bite. The hot fried dough stick was crispy on the outside and fluffy on the inside, and it tasted very good. Shen Shuwei made the fried dough sticks shorter than ordinary fried dough sticks, which made it easier to pick up and eat. He looked at Dr. Shen in surprise. "Dr. Shen, this fried dough stick is delicious." Shen Shuwei said proudly, "Of course, almost everyone in my place loves it." The cook seemed to have tasted something delicious, and ate a fried dough stick in 2 or 3 bites. Shen Shuwei made a total of 3 dishes, fried dough sticks, steamed dumplings, and meat patties. Some were left for the cook, and Shen Shuwei took the rest away. The chef had never eaten these 3 dishes before. He loved them the first time he ate them. Shen Shuwei took the dishes back to the guest room and started to plate them. He divided them into 4 portions, one for himself, one for Xiao Jinyan, one for Wu Tan, one for Wang Jingyuan, and the rest for Qin Xiao. Qin Xiao came in at this time and saw the dishes on the table. He had eaten them before. Chengzi gave them to him and they tasted good. After eating here for a long time, you will miss the food of Daxia. Seeing these dishes now, you will naturally feel a little greedy. Shen Shuwei was eating the dishes and saw Qin Xiao coming in. She pointed to the dishes on the table and said, "Qin Xiao, you came at the right time. These are reserved for you. Give this to Wu Tan after you finish eating." Okay, Qin Xiao had been with Shen Shuwei for so long, and he still knew her a little bit, and they also got along well. He picked up the fried dough sticks and handed them to his mouth and took a bite. They were still hot, so they should have just come out of the pot. Chengzi said that the fried dough sticks tasted best when they were just out of the pot. Shen Shuwei was eating the steamed dumplings, which were thin in skin and rich in fillings, leaving a lingering fragrance on the lips and teeth, much more delicious than the meals here. Sichuan jumped off the couch immediately after smelling the meaty aroma, and ran all the way to Shen Shuwei's feet. Meow. Shen Shuwei saw Sichuan, looked at his greedy look, took 3 steamed dumplings, put them in a clean plate, and then placed it in front of Sichuan. "Eat it, there are only 3, and ask the kitchen to steam fish for you for lunch." Meow. Sichuan had eaten the steamed dumplings, and the taste was particularly fragrant. He opened his mouth and took a big bite, and his greedy look seemed as if he had not eaten meat for a long time. After Shen Shuwei was full and satisfied, he took a meal out. After walking for a while, he came to the guest room opposite. As soon as he entered the yard, he saw Xiao Jinyan sitting in a wheelchair in the shadow of the yard. She came over with the meal and placed it in front of Xiao Jinyan. When someone approached, Xiao Jinyan found that he looked up and saw Shen Shuwei. At this time, she had washed and dressed up, wearing apricot white men's suit. She should not be angry, right? Shen Shuwei stood there, pointing to the meal in front of the table and said, "These are some meals I just made, you try them." Lin Xian stared at her for a long time, and his eyes looked at the meal in front of him. They were all things he had never seen before. He picked up the chopsticks with curiosity, picked up a fried dough stick and put it in his mouth. He took a bite. It was crispy on the outside and fluffy on the inside, and it tasted very good. He found that Shen Shuwei was still standing and asked, "Why don't you sit down?" Shen Shuwei shook her head, "No, I have to go to deliver meals to the 3rd master." The most common question asked by the babies is when they will recover their memories. "Young master, it won't take long." "Good afternoon, babies. Please give me monthly tickets and recommendation tickets. You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The prince longs for me every night after mastering thought reading. Author, Gongzi Yun Si. Chapter 516. Listening to Xiao Jinyan's tone, it was 100% certain that he had forgotten again. Although I saw it in the morning, I still couldn't help feeling disappointed after confirming it now. Lin Xian paused while eating the fried dough sticks. He thought that this meal was made by Shen Shuwei specially for him, but now he knew that it was not. She also made it for Wang Jingyuan. "You are just treating him, and you are so considerate to cook for him." His tone was sour. Shen Shuwei said, "Treatment and sending him food do not conflict. Besides, I promised to bring him delicious food, and I can't break my promise." Lin Xian. Lin Xian looked at the meal in front of him. He had a strong appetite, but now his appetite was greatly reduced. "You eat first, I'm going to the 3rd master." Shen Shuwei turned around and walked out. Seeing that she was about to leave, Lin Xian called her, Wait a minute. Shen Shuwei paused and looked back at Xiao Jinyan with confusion. What's wrong? Seeing her turn back, Lin Xian couldn't think of a reason to keep her for a while. Did you have something to do this morning? Shen Shuwei shook her head. No. Lin Xian didn't believe that she would run around in her undershirt for no reason, because she could tell at a glance that she was a woman. Then why did you come here in your undershirt? Shen Shuwei saw that he was so confused, so she didn't hide it. You remembered me again last night, but I woke up and found that you were not in the room, so I ran over to check and found that you didn't remember it again. Is this why you ran here in your undershirt? Lin Xian couldn't believe what she said. He remembered it again? Then why did he leave again? I can see from your eyes that you don't remember me again. Shen Shuwei took a deep breath, glanced at the food on the table and said, you eat first, I'll go and deliver the food to the third master. Without waiting for Lin Xian to speak, Shen Shuwei turned and walked out. Lin Xian looked at the petite figure disappearing in the yard, frowning. She was so anxious to deliver food to Wang Jingyuan, and she kept calling him husband. Looking at the food on the table, she lost her appetite. Shen Shuwei didn't look like she was lying. Did he really behave strangely last night? Did he leave just because he was not him? Shen Shuwei walked into Wang Jingyuan's room with the food. Qin Xiao followed closely with the medicine box. Wang Jingyuan thought Shen Shuwei would come at night, but he didn't expect her to come at this time. He hurriedly sat up with the help of the bed and tidied his clothes. Shen Shuwei put the food on the square table, and then looked at Wang Jingyuan, who got off the bed. This is the food I made by myself, you try it? You can actually make food. Wang Jingyuan came over with surprise, sat down at the table, looked up at her. You sit down too. Yes. Shen Shuwei sat down at the table. Wang Jingyuan looked at the food in front of him. He was curious because he had never seen it before. He picked up a fried dough stick with chopsticks and put it into his mouth with expectation. He took a bite and found that it tasted good. He smiled and looked up at Shen Shuwei. It's delicious. Shen Shuwei looked at the small and exquisite steamed buns on the plate and said, you can try the steamed buns again. Okay. After eating the fried dough sticks, Wang Jingyuan picked up another steamed bun and put it into his mouth. The skin was thin and the filling was rich. The taste was also good. These were all not available in the Xin Miao tribe. He praised generously, it tastes better than I imagined. I have never eaten such a delicious meal since I grew up. Shen Shuwei curved her eyebrows. If you like it, I will bring it to you tomorrow. Anyway, she wanted to cook meals herself tomorrow, so she could make more at a time. Okay. Wang Jingyuan lowered his head happily and continued to eat. After finishing the meal, the treatment began. Shen Shuwei changed a new treatment plan for Wang Jingyuan today, and the medicine was also re-prescribed. During the treatment, Wang Jingyuan cooperated very well. Even if there was pain, he did not say a word. Doctors probably like such tolerant patients, who will not scream and shout, and will not allow you to touch him while crying in pain. The treatment took an hour, and Wang Jingyuan's clothes were soaked with sweat. After Shen Shuwei said it was over, he secretly breathed a sigh of relief and finally got through it. Shen Shuwei instructed, when you take a bath later, use the medicine bag to take a medicinal bath. It will be very comfortable. Remember not to use cold water. Wang Jingyuan nodded and replied, I know, thank you, Dr. Shen. You're welcome, it's my honor to serve the golden thigh. Shen Shuwei laughed out loud after she finished speaking. Wang Jingyuan also laughed because of this golden thigh. After lunch, Shen Shuwei lay on the couch to take a nap. The couch here is different from the couch in Daxia. The couch here is made of bamboo and can be moved at will. It was windy outside, so Shen Shuwei asked Qin Xiao to move the couch outside. Shen Shuwei lay on the couch and was drowsy. When Wu Tan came over, Shen Shuwei had already fallen asleep, and he sat down on a small stool beside him. Qin Xiao saw Wu Tan frowned. What is a monk doing here? He glanced at Shen Shuwei on the couch. As a martial artist, he knew she was sleeping soundly by listening to her even breathing. Lin Xian was bored in the room, so he moved his wheelchair out and looked at the guest room opposite. He saw a man sitting in the yard. He had seen that man before, the monk. He looked around curiously and suddenly found a couch next to the monk, with a person sleeping on it. The red color told him that the person lying on the couch was Shen Shuwei. Lin Xian held the wheelchair armrest tightly. How could she be so close to the monk? I don't know why he was so angry. When he found out, he was shocked. What does it matter to him who a married woman is close to? Lin Xian looked down at his legs with a gloomy face. When will he be able to move freely? He didn't want to stay here for a day. In the following days, Shen Shuwei was mainly responsible for the treatment of Xiao Jinyan and Wang Jingyuan. The rest of the time was to make delicious food to reward herself, and then lie on the couch, not wanting to move. In the past, Shen Shuwei would have a strong appetite when she sent food to Xiao Jinyan, but now, Shen Shuwei not only sent food to him, but also sent food to Wu Tan and Wang Jingyuan. He knew these by accident. Shen Shuwei ate the food in front of her and found that Xiao Jinyan didn't move his chopsticks much. She puffed her cheeks and asked, "What's wrong? Is the food not to your taste?" Lin Xian said lightly. Your taste has changed. Shen Shuwei put a piece of braised pork into her mouth, and took a mouthful of rice, eating it very deliciously. Lin Xian looked at her eating coldly and snorted, "Didn't you say you were the crown princess? Why do you cook for them yourself?" Shen Shuwei said, "What's wrong with the crown princess? Is the crown princess not a human being? I'm tired of the food here, so I want to eat my own food. It's the same for one person or for several people. In this case, I'll make more, and everyone will be happy, right?" Lin Xian. Happy. Shen Shuwei lowered her head and continued to eat braised pork, which was her favorite. Lin Xian had no place to vent his anger, so he simply threw away the chopsticks, and when they hit the dishes, there was a ping-pong sound. Shen Shuwei was eating meat and was startled by the sudden sound. She had a large piece of meat in her mouth, her cheeks bulging, and looked at Xiao Jinyan, who suddenly lost his temper with confusion. "What's wrong with you?" Lin Xian understood the vague words, and said coldly, "Nothing, the food is not to your liking." Shen Shuwei chewed the meat in her mouth desperately, and when she swallowed it into her stomach, she asked, "Then what do you want to eat?" "I'll make it tomorrow." Lin Xian deliberately made things difficult. "Didn't you say I'm your husband? Don't you know what I want to eat?" Shen Shuwei glanced at the food in front of her: minced meat and eggplant, steamed pork with rice flour, braised pork, tomato and egg soup. "But you used to love these dishes, and your taste suddenly changed." "How could I know? You used to eat the food in the imperial kitchen, and even if it didn't suit your taste, you wouldn't throw your chopsticks. Why did you get angry with me? Can't you talk about it nicely?" Shen Shuwei said with some grievance, "In the past, you ate whatever Chengzi made, and you never got angry." Lin Xian snorted coldly, "I'm not him." Throwing down a word, he moved the wheelchair away. Shen Shuwei looked at Xiao Jinyan's bowl of rice, which was almost untouched. Then she looked at the food on the table. Wasn't it delicious? She picked up some food and ate it with the rice, wanting to swallow the grievances along with the food. After finishing the meal, Shen Shuwei cleaned up the dishes and looked at Xiao Jinyan in the room, who was reading a book very seriously. She retracted her gaze and walked out. Xiao Jinyan didn't eat much for dinner, so Shen Shuwei was afraid that he would be hungry, so she made wontons herself. Xiao Jinyan didn't like coriander and spicy food, so she didn't put them in. At this time, Lin Xian looked at the painting that Shen Shuwei left here, and he couldn't help but open it and look at it again. The second time he looked at this painting, his mouth was still dry. Since that time, Shen Shuwei never mentioned getting close to him again, and even stopped calling her husband. It should have been something worth being happy about, but he didn't feel happy. Shen Shuwei came to the guest room with a lunch box, pushed open the door, and saw Xiao Jinyan sitting in a wheelchair, still holding a book in his hand, reading very attentively. Lin Xian heard the door open, and then listened carefully to the footsteps and knew who was coming. He hurriedly stuffed the painting into the quilt, picked up the book and pretended to read it. Shen Shuwei put the lunch box on the table, opened the lunch box and took out the wonton inside. The mouth of the bowl was too hot, so she held it with a wet cloth to avoid getting burned. After putting the wonton, she saw him sitting still, so she came over. "I cooked wontons, do you want to eat some?" Lin Xian snorted, "You are so idle, you cooked another big pot of wontons?" "I'm not interested." Shen Shuwei wrapped the wontons in the heat, and she didn't get good and was criticized. She almost suspected that the person in front of her was also possessed by the soul. "Why are you talking so sarcastic? I just cooked a bowl of wontons, how can there be a pot of wontons?" Lin Xian raised his head and looked at Shen Shuwei after hearing this. "Just one bowl." "Just one bowl, if you don't want to eat it, I'll give it to Qin Xiao. He's busy during the day and has to keep watch at night, so eat it as a midnight snack," Shen Shuwei said as she took the bowl of wontons and walked out. Lin Xian was actually hungry at this time. When the wontons were served on the table, he wanted to eat them, but when he thought of her cooking a big pot, he didn't want to eat them. Now that he knew it was cooked for him alone, he naturally wanted to eat it. "I'll eat it." Shen Shuwei paused and looked back at Xiao Jinyan. "Are you sure you want to eat it? Don't throw your chopsticks again later." Lin Xian nodded, "Yeah." Shen Shuwei then put the wontons back on the table. Lin Xian also moved his wheelchair over, and seeing the steaming wontons, he became even hungrier. He picked up a spoon to scoop up the wontons, blew them cool, and put them into his mouth to eat. I don't know if it was because of hunger, but he ate it very deliciously. Shen Shuwei just looked at him without saying anything, because Xiao Jinyan didn't like what she wanted to say at the moment. She just hoped that Xiao Jinyan would remember her, which was her only support. After Lin Xian finished eating wonton, Shen Shuwei cleaned up the dishes and left. Just as Shen Shuwei stepped out of the door, Lin Xian couldn't help asking, "Have you given up?" Shen Shuwei turned his head and looked at him in confusion. "What do you mean by giving up?" Lin Xian said, "Didn't you always think that I was your husband before? You haven't called me husband these days, and you haven't mentioned this matter anymore. Isn't that giving up? You never lost your temper with me before, and you never hurt me, let alone scold me." Shen Shuwei lowered her eyes and looked at the food box in her hand, her fingers clasping the carved flowers on it. "After all, there are still some differences between me and the people here." Shen Shuwei walked out after she finished speaking. Lin Xian was stunned when he heard this. Shen Shuwei returned to the guest room. How could she give up? There is only one Xiao Jinyan, no matter what, she will wait until he remembers. Shen Shuwei, who had just finished bathing, found that she was only concerned with sadness tonight, and did not change the medicine for Xiao Jinyan. She hurriedly carried the medicine box and walked out. Lin Xian also found that Shen Shuwei ran away without changing his dressing. He was about to go to bed to rest when a black figure came in quietly. A sharp gust of wind came from behind him. Lin Xian frowned and dodged sideways. If he was a second later, he would be hit. However, the opponent missed the first attack and used the second palm. This palm was as fast as lightning. Lin Xian, who had inconvenient legs, failed to dodge in time and was hit on the back. He spit out a mouthful of blood, staining the light-colored sheets red. Such a ruthless move clearly wanted to kill him. More than 7,000 words were updated today. This chapter is 3,700, and the previous chapter is 3,500. Don't look at the fact that only 2 chapters were updated. Good night, babies. Please support with monthly tickets and recommendation tickets. The prince longs for me every night after mastering thought reading. Author, Gongzi Yun Si. Chapter 517. Based on the speed and strength of these two palms, Lin Xian could clearly sense the two people's precariousness. He covered his chest and turned his head to look behind him, and saw that the man was wearing a black brocade robe, and the golden dark pattern flashed a dazzling halo under the candle light. The most eye-catching thing was the mask on his cheek, which was shaped like a dark butterfly on the bank of the Forget Your Sorrow river, revealing a feminine jawline, and the red eyes were full of murderous intent. In the silent night, the man was full of cold and violent aura. Before Lin Xian could react, the masked man attacked again. It was too difficult for Lin Xian, who was already at the end of his strength, to dodge this attack. At this moment, the door was pushed open, and Shen Shuwei saw a man in black clothes standing in the room. As soon as she saw his posture, she guessed what was going on. She threw the only medicine box in her hand at the man in black without thinking. The masked man sensed the danger and quickly retracted his hand to avoid it. The medicine box fell to the ground, but the keychain was not opened, so the medical supplies inside did not fall out. Shen Shuwei ran over quickly to block Xiao Jinyan. She looked up at the man in black and found that he was wearing a mask and looked very mysterious. "Who are you? Why did you hurt my husband?" Lin Xian looked at Shen Shuwei standing in front of him. She was only wearing a white middle-length coat, and her hair was simply tied behind her head. She must have realized that she forgot to change his medicine, so she hurried over with the medicine box. He thought he would die this time, but he didn't expect her to stand in front of him. "You are not his opponent, come here quickly." As soon as he finished speaking, he spit out a mouthful of blood, and his internal organs seemed to be displaced, and he was in great pain. Shen Shuwei looked back at Xiao Jinyan and found that he was spitting blood from his mouth. His face was pale without a trace of blood, and he was scared. "What's wrong with you?" She turned around and squatted in front of him, touched her sleeve pocket, and found that she didn't bring a handkerchief, so she pulled her sleeve to wipe the blood from the corner of his mouth. She was a doctor, and even without feeling his pulse, she guessed that Xiao Jinyan had suffered a serious internal injury, which led to vomiting blood. Now the enemy was still there, and she had no time to feel his pulse and treat his injuries. She turned her head to look at the masked man, and roared uncontrollably, "What grudge do you have with my husband? Do you want to hurt him?" The masked man looked down at her. "What does it have to do with you? If you don't get out of the way, I can't guarantee that I won't hurt you." Shen Shuwei was also afraid of death, but if she didn't stop him, the man in front of her would definitely attack Xiao Jinyan, and she couldn't just watch Xiao Jinyan get into trouble. "I won't get out of the way." Lin Xian raised his head and looked at the woman who was blocking him, not knowing whether to call her stupid or idiotic. At this moment, the masked man suddenly attacked again, with red eyes carrying a strong murderous aura. When she encountered danger, Shen Shuwei instinctively wanted to escape, but thinking of Xiao Jinyan behind her, she not only did not dodge, but when the masked man was about to approach her, she suddenly took out a dagger from the space and stabbed the golden masked man in the heart. The heart is a vital point. If she could kill him at once, she and Xiao Jinyan would be safe. But she underestimated the strength of the masked man. When she saw the dagger about to pierce into his heart, the masked man grabbed her wrist. The force was too strong, as if she would have to say goodbye to this hand if she used a little more force. Shen Shuwei secretly said that it was over. This man was too fast, and she failed to sneak attack. The masked man glanced at the dagger in her hand, and recognized it as Po Yu at a glance by just looking at the pattern on the dagger. Po Yu was made of 1,000-year-old cold iron, which could cut hair and cut iron like mud. The masked man approached suddenly. It was summer, but she felt like she was in an ice cellar, and her back was cold. Being stared at by the red eyes, there was an illusion of being stared at by the god of death. "Do you want to kill me?" The voice seemed to come from hell, making people feel afraid. "I have no intention of harming others. If you didn't want to hurt my husband, I wouldn't have used a knife on you." Shen Shuwei found that her voice was trembling violently after she finished speaking, because she was afraid that she couldn't control it. Lin Xian knew that the masked man in front of him was not only a martial arts master, but also a ruthless person. How could a weak woman like Shen Shuwei withstand his palm? He resisted the discomfort of his body and growled, "If you are a man, come at me. What's the skill of embarrassing a woman?" The masked man raised his eyebrows and looked at Lin Xian, his eyes full of teasing. "It's easier for me to kill you now than to crush an ant." Shen Shuwei's hair stood on end when she heard this light sentence. She also saw that there was a big gap in their strength. She looked back at Xiao Jinyan, his face was pale and frightening, as if he would faint in the next second. She looked back at the masked man and found that he was staring at her. His eyes were like looking at an ant, wondering whether to crush her to death or to crush her to death. At the critical juncture of life and death, Shen Shuwei found that only one wrist was caught by the masked man, and her feet could still move. She secretly glanced at the masked man, struggled for a while, frowned and looked like she was about to cry. "My hand hurts, can you relax a little?" The masked man looked at her wrist when he heard it. Shen Shuwei saw the right time and raised her foot to kick the masked man fiercely. The lower body is the vital point of the man. As long as the kick hits, she and Xiao Jinyan can be saved. Shen Shuwei's movements were indeed fast, but no matter how fast she was still seen by the masked man. He easily dodged the fatal kick. Shen Shuwei missed. If her body wasn't more solid than that of an average person, she would have fallen badly because of overexerting herself. When she saw her slender wrist still in the other person's hand, she was actually somewhat thankful. If her body wasn't stable, she wouldn't have fallen badly. As a doctor, she knew too well that falling to the ground suddenly and hitting the head could be life-threatening and could also lead to high-level paraplegia. Shen Shuwei's little cleverness saw the masked man as a naughty child and posed no threat. "You want to save him?" Shen Shuwei nodded without hesitation, "Of course." The masked man asked again, "Why save him?" Shen Shuwei answered as a matter of course, "He is my husband, I will save him naturally." The masked man glanced at Lin Xian, "What if he is not? Will you still save him?" Shen Shuwei also looked at Xiao Jinyan and said something very realistic, "If he is not my husband, I will save him if I have the ability to save him, and I can only protect myself if I don't have the ability, but he is my husband, even if I don't have the ability, I will save him." Lin Xian was stunned when he heard this, shocked by Shen Shuwei's courage. From the beginning to the end, he knew that Shen Shuwei treated him well because he looked exactly like her husband. It's just that sometimes, he almost took on this role because of her. Just like just now, she knew the danger but rushed to save him regardless of her own safety. But it seems that she just realized that she did it for her husband, not for him. Shen Shuwei retracted her gaze and looked at the masked man. Because of the mask, her expression could not be seen, and her red pupils made people feel fear involuntarily. He just snorted, and without saying a word, he hugged her waist and flew out of the window. He really flew. Lin Xian saw Shen Shuwei being taken away, and in a hurry, he fell to the ground when he got off the bed. Qin Xiao, who had just returned, heard the noise and found that the door was open, so he ran in quickly. Seeing the master fell to the ground, he ran over in one step. Qin Xiao helped the master up, saw the blood on the ground, and looked at his master with a worried face. "Master, what's going on? Who hurt you?" Lin Xian endured the severe pain and said, "Don't worry about me first, go and save Dr. Shen, she was taken away." Qin Xiao saw that the master was injured like this, hesitated for a few seconds before saying, "It's the master." Qin Xiao put him on the bed and chased him out quickly. Shen Shuwei glanced at the eaves under her feet. She was not afraid of heights, but she was trembling with fear at this moment. Could he want to kill people and destroy corpses? "Where are you taking me?" she asked carefully, fearing that he would be unhappy and throw her down directly. She had no light skills, and if she fell down like this, she would be disabled if she didn't die. As soon as she asked, the masked man took her to the highest building. She glanced at it and estimated that it was at least 12 meters high. The masked man looked at her. "If you jump from here, I will let him go once." Shen Shuwei was about to ask him why he brought her here, but she heard this sentence. Is this man a bit perverted? He deliberately found the highest building just to let her jump off the building to commit suicide. She glanced again. It was too high. She didn't have the courage to jump, unless someone deliberately pushed her down. She retracted her gaze and looked at the masked man, trying to negotiate. "Can we change one?" The masked man said in his emotionless voice, "No change." Shen Shuwei grabbed the hem of her clothes and was so nervous. First, she was afraid that if she didn't jump, he would go back to find Xiao Jinyan, and second, he would push her down directly. Anyway, no matter which one, she was scared. "But I don't have the courage to jump," the masked man said mercilessly. "If you don't jump, I will kill him." Shen Shuwei knew that the masked man was serious when he heard it, and if he didn't jump, he would go back to find Xiao Jinyan. She was not the kind of person who was not afraid of death. It really took a lot of courage to jump down from such a high place. "Then push me down." "It's too high. I really don't have the courage to jump." Pushing her down would be different. Although she was afraid, she couldn't make the decision on her own. The masked man stepped forward, scaring Shen Shuwei to step back instinctively. Was he going to push her down? The masked man leaned forward slightly, looking at her like a frightened deer, and raised a wicked smile. "You have to jump yourself." Shen Shuwei took a deep breath. It seemed that she could not escape the drama of sacrificing herself for her lover. But she was really afraid of death. She still had a lot of snacks in her space. She would never see Xiao Jinyan again, nor would she see the Su babies. It felt like the sky was falling. The masked man saw that she was hesitant, and he threatened again. "I will count to 3. If you don't jump, I will kill him immediately." Shen Shuwei raised her head and looked at the masked man who was close at hand. Her heartbeat suddenly accelerated, and she felt like being stared at by the god of death. The man with the color mask did not give her any time to prepare. 1, 2, 3. Before he finished speaking, Shen Shuwei had no choice but to jump down with her eyes closed. It turned out that the feeling of weightlessness was like this, surrounded by fear. As her body fell rapidly, she was still thinking that she had died young and came to ancient times, thinking that she could eat and drink and wait for death. But she didn't expect to die young again. This time she was not so lucky to be reborn. How long will it take Xiao Jinyan to forget her? She almost forgot. Xiao Jinyan already didn't remember her. How could he forget her again? The Su babies are not even 2 years old yet. They are still so young. Will Xiao Jinyan find a stepmother for them and forget her too? It's like she's never been here and no one will remember her. When Shen Shuwei thought of this, she couldn't help crying. Just when Shen Shuwei was crying very sadly, he found that he was being held by someone. The whistling wind in his ears disappeared. Instead, he heard a joking voice. "If you are asked to dance, you will really dance. Without him, you will not be alive." After returning to the ground, Shen Shuwei stepped on the grass and realized that she was really not dead. She wiped away her tears. She was almost scared to death just now. She raised her head and looked at the masked man who was much taller than her. Facing the pervert, she dared not speak out in anger. "I might not be able to die without him, but I can't do it, and I can't just watch you kill him," she said very quietly, for fear of angering him. If you let him go this time, you won't have such good luck next time. The man wearing a colored mask dropped these words and disappeared into the night. Shen Shuwei watched helplessly as the masked man disappeared into the night, without reacting for a long time. He just left. The first time she met a pervert, Shen Shuwei was frightened. Thinking that Xiao Jinyan was seriously injured, she rushed back without stopping. Before taking 2 steps, she found that her legs were weak, all because of the fright she had just made without thinking about her safety. It took Shen Shuwei a while to return to the guest room with weak legs. Lin Xian kept staring at the door, hoping that Qin Xiao could bring Shen Shuwei back. He didn't know what Qin Xiao's kung fu was, so he could only hope so. Seeing that Shen Shuwei had returned safely, he was startled for a moment. When he was sure that she was back, his heart dropped. He didn't hurt you, did he? Shen Chu shook his head slightly, no. As she said that, she strode over and looked at his pale face. He had vomited a lot of blood just now. She quickly grabbed his hand and checked his pulse. Lin Xian couldn't believe it. The man wearing the mask looked like a ruthless person. He took her away. How could he let her back so easily? He let you come back so easily? Didn't he threaten you? Didn't he force you? Shen Shuwei didn't bother to answer his question. She retracted her hand and said, "You have suffered serious internal injuries and can only be recuperated slowly. I will prepare the medicine for Qin Xiao first, and you can rest after drinking." That masked man was too cruel. If he did it again, he might not even be able to save his life. It scares me to think about it now. Lin Xian asked urgently, "You haven't answered my question yet." "He didn't make things difficult for me, he just scared me." She still hasn't gotten over the fear just now. The prince longs for me every night after mastering thought reading. Author, Gongzi Yun Si. Chapter 518. Chapter 518. Want to run away with Xiao Jinyan? You can walk now. I'll prepare the medicine first. Chen Shuwei stood up and picked up the medicine box on the ground. Seeing the dagger that fell on the ground, she picked it up again and planned to put it back in the space after returning. Lin Xian looked at Shen Shuwei, who was busy, and always felt that it was not as simple as he said, otherwise the man would not take her away. "How did he scare you?" Shen Shuwei looked back at Xiao Jinyan, lowered her head and continued to prepare the medicine. Shen Shuwei's silence made Lin Xian feel that it must be that man who threatened Shen Shuwei, otherwise why didn't she say it? After the medicine was prepared, Qin Xiao was asked to boil the medicine. Qin Xiao looked around and didn't find Shen Shuwei, so he came back and found that he had returned, so he went to boil the medicine with peace of mind. Shen Shuwei came over with the medicine, squatted in front of Xiao Jinyan, rolled up his trouser legs, and exposed his knees. When changing the medicine, she looked at the man's injured knee, and then thought about the words of the masked man, which meant that Xiao Jinyan would not be let go. The masked man's martial arts skills were so powerful that it was hard to defend against him. She looked up at the man, and his face was still very pale, almost the same as when she first saw him. "When your legs can walk, let's leave here. It's too dangerous here." Lin Xian was very keen to notice her fear. "Did the masked man say something to you?" "I feel that he must be an assassin sent by someone. Although his temperament is not like an assassin who takes money to do things, he really wants to kill you. We can't beat him now, so we can only run first," Shen Shuwei said very seriously. Without Shen Shuwei saying it, Lin Xian also knew that the masked man wanted his life. He didn't know him at all, but he wanted to kill him. He was more curious, "Where did he take you just now?" "The highest tower here can see the entire imperial city." Shen Shuwei was so scared that her legs were weak, and she didn't have the heart to appreciate the scenery of the entire imperial city. Lin Xian asked again, "Why did he take you there?" "Maybe he thought it was the best place to chat." Shen Shuwei didn't say anything about jumping off the building. She put down her trouser legs and stood up to continue preparing medicine. Xiao Jinyan's internal injuries were too serious. If he didn't take good care of himself, it would be difficult to recover. Lin Xian always felt that Shen Shuwei was hiding something from him. Looking at her slender back, she must have been very scared when she was taken away by that man. At this time, Qin Xiao came in with the boiled medicine, and with it came the bitter smell of Chinese medicine. "Master, drink it while it's hot." Lin Xian frowned and glanced at the thick black medicine in front of him. He knew that the medicine was very bitter without drinking it. In order to treat internal injuries, he could only grit his teeth and drink it. Just as Lin Xian was drinking the medicine, Shen Shuwei came over, took out a sour plum, unwrapped it and handed it to him. "Eat something sour, it can relieve the bitterness." Lin Xian looked at the black thing on her body, raised his head and looked at her with a puzzled look. "What is this?" Shen Shuwei said, "Sour plum." Lin Xian had never heard of sour plums, and when she heard that it could relieve the bitterness, she took the sour plum and put it in her mouth. As soon as she took a bite, the sour taste immediately spread in her mouth, and the bitterness was indeed relieved. After drinking the medicine, Shen Shuwei let him rest, and she returned to her room. She was actually quite tired after tossing for most of the night. If it were usual, she would have fallen asleep as soon as she touched the pillow, but this time, she tossed and turned and couldn't sleep. Later, she finally fell asleep, but she didn't sleep well. Because she had a dream, she dreamed that the masked man came to kill Xiao Jinyan again. Seeing the scene of the white knife going in and the red knife coming out, even breathing became difficult, and she was scared and woke up from the nightmare. As soon as she opened her eyes, she found that it was already daybreak, and the sun was pouring in from the window, which made her feel very hot. The next second, she saw Sichuan lying on her chest, with a frown on her face. No wonder she couldn't breathe well. It would be strange if she could breathe smoothly under the pressure of such a big Sichuan. Sichuan greeted her with a self-proclaimed super cute expression, "Meow." Shen Shuwei's face was dark, and she raised her hand to push it into the bed, then got up and put on her clothes. Sichuan looked at Shen Shuwei with a confused face, and failed to act cute for the first time. Shen Shuwei went to make breakfast after washing up. She had become familiar with the chef in the kitchen these days. Every time she came, in addition to the male chef last time, there were several unfamiliar chefs who looked at Shen Shuwei with admiration and wanted to learn cooking from her. So every time she made breakfast, there was a group of people watching. Dr. Shen is so amazing, not only is he a great doctor, but he is also a superb cook. This was the sentence Shen Shuwei heard the most. Medicine was something she was forced to learn, and she thought it was good when she was learning it. At least when she was sick, she could treat herself without going to the hospital. She learned to enjoy food because she could not make do with food, and even the simplest ingredients had to taste good. Shen Shuwei still divided breakfast into 4 portions, and she took one of them to Xiao Jinyan. If it weren't for the sudden incident last night, Xiao Jinyan's body would have recovered by now. Today, Shen Shuwei found that his face looked very bad. The palm last night injured his 5 internal organs. If it weren't for his good physique, he would definitely be lying in bed now. Lin Xian sat in a wheelchair, but his back was leaning against the back of the chair. It is said that illness is like a mountain falling, and the same is true for injuries. Shen Shuwei put the meal and porridge in front of him, and said in a gentle voice, "I made lean meat porridge with side dishes, you eat some." Lin Xian was also hungry now. Although his internal organs were very uncomfortable, he still wanted to eat porridge when he saw it. This time Lin Xian did not get angry because she cooked it for others, but asked, "Aren't you tired from doing this every day?" Shen Chu took a sip of the porridge and said, "I'm not tired. I have to eat it myself. If I don't eat it and make it just for you, I might feel a little tired." Lin Xian: "I have never seen someone who loves to tell the truth so much. Shen Shuwei cooks breakfast herself because she wants to eat it. Otherwise, she would naturally be too lazy to do it. On such a hot day, wouldn't it be cool to lie on the couch and blow the air? During this period, because Shen Shuwei made breakfast every day, both Wang Jingyuan and Wu Tan said that Shen Shuwei made them fat. Shen Chu touched his face slightly and then his belly, with a puzzled look on his face. I eat as much as the two of you every day, why do I feel like I'm still losing weight? It wasn't Shen Shuwei's own perception, but it was just that he had really lost weight, and the four of them saw it in their eyes. Although Shen Shuwei is thin, she is not skinny and beautiful, but has flesh and looks voluptuous. The palm-sized face is still fleshy, but now, the fleshiness is not as obvious as before. Wang Jingyuan. I was hit, thank you. Wu Tan. We were both hit, thank you. Now, Shen Shuwei is almost always by Xiao Jinyan's side no matter day or night. After what happened at night, she is always worried that the masked man will show up again and attack Xiao Jinyan. She was also afraid that Xiao Jinyan, who had forgotten her, would annoy her. Xiao Jinyan had been a bit uncertain these days and often lost his temper for no reason. He lost his temper when she came late to change the dressing, and when the taste of the food was changed, he still lost his temper. There's always a reason to lose your temper anyway. But after getting along with him all day today, she found that his temper seemed to have improved again. He didn't lose his temper once or throw his chopsticks. Lin Xian was in a much better mood today than in the past few days, because Shen Shuwei stayed with him the whole day, except when cooking. After lunch, Shen Chu slightly yawned. I'll take a nap first. If you need anything, wake me up. Lin Xian said lightly. Yeah. Shen Shuwei took off his shoes, lay down directly on the couch, put his hands on his pillow, closed his eyes, and fell asleep after a while. Lin Xian took out a book from the bookshelf, opened it and read it for a while. He found that he was thirsty, so he moved his wheelchair to the table, picked up the teapot, poured himself a cup of tea, put it to his lips and took a few sips slowly. He glanced at the person on the couch and knew he was sleeping soundly with his even breathing. After drinking a cup of tea, he put the cup on the table, moved the wheelchair to the couch, looked at her sleeping posture, and couldn't help but wonder, isn't it uncomfortable to sleep on your stomach? Shen Shuwei fell asleep, so naturally she couldn't answer his question. Lin Xian stared at the sleeping face for a long time. She looked really small, especially those eyes that seemed to be able to talk. I wonder if she usually sleeps in other men's rooms without warning. If Zhenxiang did something to her, her small body might not have the ability to resist at all. Wang Leiwen saw Dr. Shen several times when he came here. The first time he saw Dr. Shen sitting next to Lin Xian and chatting, the second time he saw Dr. Shen sleeping on the couch, and the third time he still saw Dr. Shen sleeping on the couch, just like this guest room. It's his guest room. So I came more frequently today and found that Dr. Shen almost stayed here. This afternoon, Wang Leiwen came to visit Lin Xian again. Actually, he just wanted to know if Dr. Shen was staying here again. As soon as he came in, he saw Dr. Shen on the couch and was immediately furious. Dr. Shen, if you have nothing to do, go back to your guest room. What's it like to stay here with Mr. Lin all day? Shen Shuwei had just woken up from his nap and was a little confused. Is there something wrong? Even if Dr. Shen is a man, it is not appropriate to stay around Mr. Lin all day long. It will make outsiders mistakenly think that you and Mr. Lin have some unclear relationship. No wonder Wang Leiwen would think this way, masculine style is not a taboo here. Shen Shuwei looked confused. Is there any unclear relationship between men? She turned to look at Xiao Jinyan. Do you know? Lin Xian touched his nose, and he knew of course that the sleeves were broken. Wang Leiwen felt that Dr. Shen was just pretending to be stupid. Looking at his pretty face, his skin was as beautiful as snow, and his figure was much petite compared to men. Many masculine men like this style. Dr. Shen, apart from treating Mr. Lin, You don't have to stay here. What if Mr. Lin is misled? Lin Xian raised his head and looked at Wang Leiwen. Princess Leiwen, Dr. Shen is a dedicated doctor who knows both medical skills and meals. She also stays here so that I can recover as soon as possible. But, Wang Leiwen looked at Dr. Shen, always feeling that he just wanted to mislead Lin Xian. Lin Xian glanced at Shen Shuwei and asked, "What's the matter with Princess Leun?" Although Wang Leiwen felt a little unhappy, he still smiled and said, "Nothing, I just came to see you. I've been a little busy recently, so I'm afraid you'll be bored in the house." Lin Xian, I like to be quiet. Princess Leun can just be busy with her own things, so there is no need to worry about me. Wang Leiwen nodded happily, "When I'm done, I'll take you to the square to play." Lin Xian, "Yeah." Shen Shuwei was a little unhappy. As a married man, how could he casually agree to travel with a woman? Sure enough, after I didn't remember her, I lost my sense of propriety. Xiao Jinyan had been practicing for 5 days, and Shen Shuwei couldn't wait to get him to stand up and walk around. Lin Xian was actually looking forward to being able to stand up. When she said she could walk, she couldn't wait to stand up holding the wheelchair armrest. Good afternoon, babies. Please vote for me. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The prince longs for me every night after mastering thought reading. Author, Gongzi Yun Si. Chapter 519. He was cautious, perhaps too nervous, and never let go of the armrest. If you can move freely and no longer rely on a wheelchair, then you are called a normal person. Shen Shuwei saw that he was hesitant to take steps, so she stepped forward to hold his arm. "Let's go, tell me if you feel any pain." Lin Xian looked at the ground. Maybe it was because he hadn't walked for a long time. When he took the first step, he had the illusion of stepping on cotton, which was very unreal. Then he took the second and third steps, regaining the feeling of walking. Shen Chu slightly raised his head and looked at Xiao Jinyan. "Does it hurt?" If Shen Shuwei hadn't asked, Lin Xian was so happy that he could walk that he forgot about the pain. "It hurts a little, but it's bearable." Shen Chu said slightly, "It will hurt a little at first. If you practice more every day and cultivate yourself well, you will be able to walk freely in less than half a month." Lin Xian had been in a wheelchair for so long, and it was nothing to him that he could walk freely within half a month. Shen Shuwei supported him and walked for a while, then heard him say, "I want to walk alone." Okay. Shen Shuwei let go of his hand, sat on the chair and looked at him. Lin Xian stood up straight. There was no one to support him, so the weight of his body fell on his legs. He tried to walk a few steps, except for a slower pace. Shen Shuwei picked up the teacup and drank tea while watching him walk. He looked very cautious, like a child learning to walk. Xiao Jinyan should have been in high spirits. If that person hadn't hurt him, he would have won the battle by now and returned to Daxia, where their family was reunited. Still don't know who that person is. The masked man suddenly appeared in her mind. Could it be that he hurt Xiao Jinyan and then pushed him off the cliff? The more Shen Shuwei thought about it, the more she felt that it might be him. His behavior was so abnormal. Who could have caused the injuries on Xiao Jinyan's body but a pervert? Lin Xian walked for a while, and Shen Chu slightly reminded him, "Let's take a rest first. Don't use too much force during the recovery stage. You need to do it step by step." Lin Xian was just a little excited and unwilling to stop while walking. When he heard her reminder, he said okay and returned to the wheelchair to sit down. Shen Shuwei lifted the teapot, poured a cup of tea and handed it to him. She found that his forehead was covered with sweat beads. "Drink some water." "Thank you." Lin Xian passed the teacup from her hand to her lips and took 2 sips to quench her thirst. Shen Shuwei took out a handkerchief and leaned over, carefully wiping the sweat on his forehead. Lin Xian, who was drinking tea, paused. He looked up and saw an extremely beautiful face, wiping sweat beads seriously, just like her seriousness when treating diseases. After Shen Shuwei wiped her sweat, she found that Xiao Jinyan had been staring at her. She blinked her beautiful starry eyes twice and asked, "What's wrong?" Lin Xian took a sip of tea and coughed lightly, "You are very virtuous." Shen Shuwei's self-evaluation is, it's not bad. Although she can't do the 3 obediences and 4 virtues of ancient women, she can be regarded as virtuous because she knows medical skills and cooking skills, she is single-minded, and her husband takes care of her husband. Lin Xian chuckled, still very humble. Shen Shuwei stared at the man in front of him for a long time. It had been almost half a year since he led the troops on the expedition. He had lost a lot of weight, but it still did not affect his appearance. Now that he didn't remember herself, she had the idea of a cliché. She had never asked Xiao Jinyan what he liked about her. If it was because of her appearance, she was indeed beautiful, but the most important thing in the palace was beautiful women. She has advantages but also many disadvantages, so I am very curious about why he prefers her so much. She smiled and asked, "What kind of girl do you like?" Lin Xian was drinking tea. He didn't expect her to ask such a question. He looked at Shen Shuwei with a smile on his face and said, "Be obedient." Obedient. Shen Chu was stunned for a moment, "That doesn't count. With your status, what woman wouldn't listen to you?" It was just Lin Xian's joke just now. Seeing that she wanted to know so seriously, he thought for a while and found that his head was so muddy that he couldn't think of anything. His eyes stayed on Shen Shuwei, and a picture suddenly appeared in his mind. Shen Shuwei suddenly understood, "Did you deliberately perfuse me?" Lin Xian neither admitted nor denied, but asked, "What about you? What do you like about your husband?" Shen Chu snorted slightly, "I'm not stupid. You don't tell me, but you still want to trick me." "I won't tell you." Lin Xian raised the corners of his lips, "I would know even if you didn't tell me." Shen Shuwei asked, "How did you know?" She knew that Xiao Jinyan could often guess her thoughts, but how could he guess it even if he had lost his memory? Lin Xian's thin lips spit out 2 words, "Looks." Shen Shuwei was shocked when he heard this. "Can you guess this?" She was indeed attracted by Xiao Jinyan's unparalleled handsome appearance at first, and with a seductive attitude, she would naturally take a few more glances when she saw it. Then she has a little problem, that is, when she sees beautiful scenery and beautiful people, she will draw them. Moreover, I especially like to draw the chest and abdominal muscles of handsome guys, so I created that drawing. She liked Xiao Jinyan's skin very superficially at first. But later, other emotions were mixed in. Lin Xian observed her expression and saw that he had guessed correctly. She liked Xiao Jinyan's appearance. "I didn't realize that you are such a superficial woman. I didn't say that I only value the heart and not the appearance of a woman. If your appearance doesn't attract me, how can I understand your heart?" Shen Shuwei said confidently. Lin Xian laughed when he heard this. Shen Shuwei said dissatisfiedly, "If I was an ugly freak, would you treat me differently? Love at first sight is just lust, who would fall in love with an ugly freak at first sight?" Lin Xian's smile froze, and suddenly found that what she said made sense. How could an ugly freak fall in love at first sight without even looking at her more? "You make sense." Shen Shuwei came closer and looked at him expectantly, "Then what kind of girls do you like?" Lin Xian stared at her for a long time, and suddenly had the idea of teasing her, "Come closer." Shen Shuwei came closer with expectation, and they were very close to each other, so close that they could feel each other's breathing. Lin Xian's hand touched her delicate cheek, "Do you really think I'm your husband?" Shen Shuwei said seriously, "Of course, I won't make a mistake, husband. You can see it now, you should know that you have a mole on the inside of your thigh, right?" Lin Xian's eyes paused when he heard this. He bathed every day, so he naturally knew his body. There was indeed a mole on the inside of his thigh. Shen Shuwei saw him lower his eyes and said nothing, knowing that he already knew it. She smiled and said, I know you have it even if you don't say it, because you are Xiao Jinyan. Lin Xian saw that she was laughing so happily, he raised his eyebrows, are you so sure? Shen Chu smiled and said, of course. Lin Xian stared at her smiling eyebrows, his eyes passed from her eyes across her nose, and fell on her pink lips. For a moment, he couldn't help but slowly leaned over. When he was about to kiss her, he was interrupted by a voice of Master. Because the door was open, Qin Xiao came in directly and saw the two masters kissing each other. From this angle, they were kissing. Master, continued Qin Xiao disappeared in front of them at the fastest speed in his life, and he closed the door before leaving. Lin Xian realized what he wanted to do, and hurriedly sat up straight, raised the teacup in his hand and took a sip of tea to ease his embarrassment. Shen Shuwei held the handrail with both hands and asked seriously, did you want to kiss me just now? Lin Xian snorted lightly, you think too much, how could I kiss you? Shen Shuwei is not stupid. His actions just now clearly wanted to kiss her. It was the first time that he wanted to kiss her actively. This is a good sign. But he was interrupted by Qin Xiao. You are lying. Why would I lie to you? Lin Xian smiled lightly, raised the teacup and continued to drink tea. Shen Shuwei thought he was shy, if my wife wants to kiss, she can kiss her. What's there to be embarrassed about? Lin Xian, thank you for your care during this time. Shen Shuwei smiled slightly, we are all family, no need to say thank you. Lin Xian didn't say anything. When Shen Shuwei came out of the guest room, she saw Qin Xiao, who was guarding the yard, walking towards her. Did the master remember? Shen Shuwei shrugged helplessly, no. But the master? Qin Xiao was a little embarrassed to say that he had just seen the masters doing intimate things. Originally, there was some turning point, but you interrupted it, so there is no future, Shen Shuwei said and spread her hands, helpless. Qin Xiao immediately regretted it after hearing it. It was a dark and windy night. Shen Shuwei carried the medicine box to Xiao Jinyan's place. She always felt that there was someone behind her. She looked back and saw that there was no shadow on the empty path. Was she too nervous? Shen Shuwei retracted her sight and saw a black shadow floating by. She was so scared that she hugged the medicine box and ran all the way to Xiao Jinyan's room. Lin Xian raised his head and looked at Shen Shuwei, who was running all the way in. What's wrong? Are you sweating profusely? Nothing. Shen Shuwei calmed down her frightened heartbeat and walked over. Lin Xian didn't think much after hearing this. When changing the dressing on her chest, Shen Shuwei breathed a sigh of relief when she saw the scabby wound. After the poison was removed, the wound healed quickly. After changing the dressing on her knee, Shen Shuwei packed up her medicine box, came to the bed, and negotiated, can I stay here tonight? Lin Xian asked, why? Shen Shuwei had a strong premonition in her heart, always feeling that something was going to happen tonight. She hugged Xiao Jinyan's arm and said, I have a bad premonition, I'm afraid you're in danger, let me stay, I'll sleep in a small area, not taking up space. Lin Xian looked at her with a smile, I'm a man of blood, you sleep with me, aren't you afraid that I will do something to you? Shen Shuwei shook her head vigorously, no, no, you can do whatever you want. In fact, she was eager for him to do something, because this would show that he still had feelings for her even if he lost his memory. Seeing that his legs were about to recover, the chances of coaxing him back to Daxia would be higher. Good night, babies. Please support with monthly tickets and recommendation tickets. The prince longs for me every night after mastering thought reading. Author, Gongzi Yun Si. Chapter 520. Lin Xian was amused, you are not afraid, I am a man, Naturally I have nothing to be afraid of, if you want to stay, then stay. Shen Shuwei was happy to hear that. She put the medicine box back on the table, and bolted the door. Lin Xian looked at her actions indifferently, and was not annoyed by her initiative to stay overnight. Although she spent most of her time eating and sleeping, she would not make people feel boring, but felt that it would be nice if he had such a lovely wife. Shen Shuwei bolted the door and walked over with brisk steps. Sharing a bed with Xiao Jinyan was a very common thing for her, and she did not feel awkward because he did not remember. On the contrary, Lin Xian was a little uncomfortable. When Shen Shuwei lay beside him in slippers, Lin Xian could not ignore that he would be sleeping with a woman tonight. After Shen Shuwei got on the bed, she lay beside him naturally. She looked at the man sitting there sideways and patted him with a smile. "Aren't you sleepy?" "Of course I'm sleepy," Lin Xian said, and lay down, keeping 2 arms distance from her. The bed was not as big as the one in the East Palace, but it was not small either. It was more than enough for 2 people to lie down. Shen Shuwei, who was used to sleeping on a soft bed, was not used to it for the first few nights. She would have backaches in the morning, but now she is used to it. Shen Shuwei stared at the man for a long time. After he forgot her, he was a little different from before. It might be because there was another person's memory in his mind, so the way of speaking and expression would be a little different. Before he lost his memory, Xiao Jinyan was calm and would never neglect etiquette at any time, except in bed. Now Xiao Jinyan is a bit like a fox. Lin Xian always felt that there was a gaze staring at him with his eyes closed. There was no cover, which made people unable to ignore it. How could he sleep? He had to open his eyes and look over, and then he met a pair of sparkling star eyes. "Don't you want to sleep?" Sleep. Shen Shuwei was actually sleepy a long time ago. There were no entertainment programs in ancient times, not even mobile phones, so she was used to going to bed early. Seeing her close her eyes, Lin Xian retracted his gaze and closed his eyes to continue sleeping. At first, Shen Shuwei saw a black figure when she came here, and thought of the masked man, and was a little worried whether he came to kill Xiao Jinyan. But in the end, she couldn't hold on any longer and fell into a deep sleep. Although Lin Xian closed his eyes, he didn't fall asleep. The woman lying beside him couldn't be ignored the more he wanted to ignore her. In summer, although the windows were open for ventilation, it was still a little hot. The faint fragrance always surrounded his nose and invaded his senses wantonly. He tried hard to ignore this feeling, but at this time he remembered the painting. He remembered the person in the painting very clearly. Shen Shuwei in the painting had a bit more feminine charm, with a rosy face and a slender waist that could be grasped. Just thinking about it for a while, Lin Xian suddenly felt dry mouth and hot all over. After Shen Shuwei fell asleep, she didn't follow the rules at the beginning, but began to find a comfortable posture. When she moved, she would inevitably touch Lin Xian. Lin Xian, who was originally unable to sleep, was touched by her. He opened his eyes suddenly and looked at the person next to him, only to see her humming with her eyes closed. She used to sleep on her side, but now she was lying down, with her limbs spread out, one foot pressed on his leg, and one arm on his chest. The wound on his chest had scabbed over, so it wouldn't hurt if it was touched. He saw that the place where she slept took up almost half of the bed. Didn't she take up any space? Shen Shuwei felt uncomfortable sleeping in this position, so she changed her position again, still lying on her side, but this time she hugged his arm into her arms. Shen Shuwei has always had a habit of sleeping, that is, she needs to hold something in her arms to sleep more peacefully. If there is a pillow, she will hold the pillow, or she will hold the quilt. When she was in bed with Xiao Jinyan, she hugged his arm. With his arm held in her arms, he could clearly feel the softness on his chest. Lin Xian couldn't sleep at all at this moment. He was a normal man, without any defects in any aspect. How could he withstand such unconscious teasing by a woman? He should have rejected her proposal to stay overnight, at least he wouldn't have been tortured like this. He didn't sleep well that night, and he barely fell asleep until dawn. The next day, when Shen Shuwei woke up, she saw a handsome face facing her. She lay on the bed, staring at the familiar face for a long time. Her eyes fell on his lips, and with a teasing mind, she stretched out her finger to poke it. Lin Xian had gone to bed in the early morning, and he was sleeping very deeply at this time. It was a little itchy when he was poked, but he just frowned slightly and didn't mean to wake up. Shen Shuwei looked at Xiao Jinyan, who usually got up early, but he was sleeping so deeply at this time. Her eyes looked at Xiao Jinyan's neck, and the arc of his Adam's apple was a bit sexy. She poked his Adam's apple with her fingers again. The Adam's apple rolled up and down, a shallow moan leaked from his lips and teeth. Seeing that he still showed no sign of waking up, Shen Shuwei simply leaned over to his ear and whispered, "Get up." Lin Xian was dreaming, and the scene in the dream was somewhat indescribable. He always felt that the dream was a little unreal. Shen Shuwei actually took the initiative to tease him and touch his Adam's apple. But he always got up early, and when he heard Shen Shuwei calling him to get up, he still forced himself to wake up from the dream. He opened his eyes with difficulty, and his narrow eyes narrowed into a slit. Then he slowly opened them and saw a delicate face. Used to sleeping alone, he suddenly saw a woman. He was stunned for a moment, and then he remembered that Shen Shuwei stayed overnight last night. Because he didn't sleep well, he had a headache. He rubbed his temples. "What are you doing?" Shen Chu smiled and said, "I want to wake you up." Lin Xian rubbed his temples for a while, sat up with his hands on the bed, raised his eyes and glanced out the window. It was already dark. At this time, he was already sitting in a wheelchair drinking tea. Shen Shuwei also sat up and stretched. She tilted her head and stared at him, and found that his eyes were dark blue. "Did you sleep well last night?" When Lin Xian thought about being tortured by her all night last night, and then looked at her innocent face, he said expressionlessly, "It's pretty good." Shen Shuwei asked, "Then why do you have dark circles?" Lin Xian's eyes paused when he heard this. Without a mirror, he didn't know if he had dark circles at this time. He raised his eyes and glanced at Shen Shuwei. Seeing that she was still looking at him with a puzzled expression, he coughed lightly and said, "Are you still making breakfast today? Let's do it. The food here is not as delicious as what I cook. For my mouth, I have to spend an hour and a half making the food." Shen Shuwei sighed after finishing speaking. "It would be great if Chengzi is here. She has obtained my true inheritance, and she will do whatever I want to eat." Lin Xian nodded when he heard this. "That's right. As a princess, there is no reason for you to cook in person. I'm getting up." Shen Shuwei got out of bed neatly, put on his shoes, and then walked out carrying the medicine box. Lin Xian sat there and watched Shen Shuwei disappear at the door. After thinking for a while, he lay back on the bed and went back to sleep. Shen Shuwei returned to her guest room, put down her medicine box and was about to get dressed and wash up when she saw a note on the table. She picked it up and took a look at it doubtfully. When she read the contents on the note, her hands shook in fear. The note said that you really didn't care about anything for him. Shen Shuwei subconsciously thought of the masked man. He was the only one who wanted to kill Xiao Jinyan. Could the dark figure she saw last night be the masked man? No wonder she was always restless, always feeling like something was going to happen. After she recovered from her fear, Shen Shuwei took the note and ran out. Bang! The door was pushed open forcefully. Lin Xian, who had fallen asleep, was awakened by a loud noise. As soon as he opened his eyes, he saw a figure running towards him in a hurry. "Husband, what I felt last night was correct. Look." Shen Shuwei hurriedly handed the note in her hand to him. Lin Xian hadn't fully woken up yet. He hesitated for 2 seconds before taking the note from her hand and glancing at the words on it. His phoenix eyes narrowed slightly. "Does he know you?" Shen Shuwei shook his head vigorously. How could I possibly know such a perverted person? I don't know him. That night was also the first time I saw him. Lin Xian showed her the written side of the note, but it says between the lines, he knows you. I really don't know him. Shen Shuwei carefully recalled the masked man's behavior that night. Goosebumps rose and she shuddered. But his behavior was indeed weird, very much like a pervert. Lin Xian thought about that night. The masked man not only acted strangely, but also acted out of common sense. What did he say to you that night? Why did he take you away and let you go? Shen Chu blinked his beautiful big eyes twice and started to wonder, maybe it's because it's offensive to kill a weak woman like me, and I feel like I'm losing face, so you let me go. Lin Xian had been getting along with her for some time, and he knew this was a lie as soon as he heard it. I'm asking you about business, don't talk about things you don't want to do. Shen Shuwei couldn't tell her that she agreed to the masked man to jump off the building that night to save him. Husband, a perverted psychology is not something we ordinary people can understand. Whether perverts speak or behave, they do not act according to common sense. If it follows common sense, it is not perverted. Lin Xian keenly realized that she was deliberately changing the subject. How could a person who regarded human life as a piece of shit let him go because of the lives of multiple women? He pondered for a moment and asked, it has something to do with me, right? Shen Shuwei denied guiltily, no, I'm hungry. If you have anything to do, we'll talk about it later. I'll make breakfast first. After Shen Shuwei finished speaking, he stood up and left. Before he could take a step, Lin Xian grabbed his wrist and pulled him back. She looked at him doubtfully, what to do? Lin Xian said one sentence at a time, do you think that the masked man wouldn't come to your door if you didn't tell me? Don't you wonder why the masked man let you back? And why did he leave you a note? Shen Chu thought for a while and guessed, maybe he wants to remind me. Lin Xian raised the note in his hand again and showed it to her, see for yourself, he is clearly saying that you don't care about yourself for me. If you don't know someone, why would he leave you such a note? Good afternoon. Please support with monthly votes and recommendation votes.